All right, we're going to get started here. I am the co-chair of the Basic Ed Funding Commission, Representative Mike Strella from Lancaster. And for everyone's information, this meeting
Recording in progress.
Yep. For everyone's information, this meeting is being recorded and streamed live online. I would ask everyone to please silence their phones, or we will turn the cameras on you and shame you to no end. Vicki, will you please take the roll? Here. All right, thank you, Vicki. We're now going to be entering 3 testimonies into the hearing record. Philadelphia Councilmember Isaiah Thomas submitted remarks.
Mr. Chairman, if
Yes.
I may,
Yes.
offer just a few opening remarks. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I was going to get these
Okay,
this
you wanna
testimony
get
entered
them?
first, but so we're entering 3 testimonies into the record. Philadelphia Councilman Isaiah Thomas submitted remarks for the record. Reginald Streeter, President of the School District of Philadelphia Board of Education, and also excerpts from the parent testimony submitted by Power Interfaith. Now, going to my co-chair, Senator Phillips-Hill, do you have any opening remarks? And then we'll get to Senator Hughes and Representative Isaacson because we're in their districts.
Absolutely. Thank you, Co-Chair Strella. Good afternoon. I'm Kristen Phillips-Hill, State Senator, 28th District, representing Southern New York County. And I want to welcome today's testifiers as well as members of the public who are joining us, and also for those who are joining us virtually. We appreciate it. I would like to thank the City of Philadelphia Public Schools for graciously hosting this commission meeting here today. And as I have said all week, in order for this commission to be effective, we cannot have a preconceived idea or notion of where this commission is going to go or what the outcome will be. We need to listen to everyone, and we may like what we hear, we may not like what we hear, but we need to work together in a bipartisan fashion to craft a well thought out set of recommendations for the General Assembly regarding funding of the Commonwealth's system of education in a way that ensures that the system put in place by the General Assembly can appropriately serve the needs of our students. And I have to commend all of my colleagues on this commission. These meetings have been incredibly productive and respectful, and I think will hopefully yield a good product moving forward. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Co-Chairman Strella. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hughes.
Mr. Chair, I will respectfully yield to Representative Isaacson.
What a gentleman. Thank you.
Try.
And I want to commend Senator Phillips-Hill for wearing green in support of the Eagles this evening. And it's good to be home. For the past 2 days, we've been traveling this Commonwealth up in Northeast Pennsylvania and in Harrisburg, taking testimony about what educating students look like in 2023. We discussed the changing needs that school districts find themselves with, and these issues are not just subject to their districts. It's issues we face here every day in Philadelphia. In Harrisburg, we also took testimony from the plaintiffs of the landmark court decision, and this commission started out with just discussing updating the Basic Ed Funding Commission, and we certainly had a much deeper conversation, and I appreciate everyone participating in that so that we can get to what we need to do here to educate our students throughout Pennsylvania in an adequate and equitable way. And here in Philadelphia, I'm very happy that we were given the opportunity to have this hearing and certainly welcome our new superintendent. who has taken on the challenges that he found, and that is us being the largest school district here in the Commonwealth. And he also manages the second largest school district here in the Commonwealth, and that is the Charter Schools of Philadelphia, and you do it in one budget. And we look forward to having your testimony regarding what is needed here in Philadelphia in 2023 for our students, and of course our other testifiers, but it's hometown, so I was taking advantage. But I want to thank you, and to Senator Hughes if he wants.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Chair Sterling, Chair Kristen Phillips-Hill, and hopefully that other piece of legislation that we're talking about, we can get some action on that around social media. That would be very good, very good, very good. I just want to thank the School District of Philadelphia family, entire family, and that starts with the students, but also includes everyone who works in or close to a school somewhere in the city of Philadelphia, because of your commitment and your diligence and your spirit of never giving up on our children. That is to be lauded in each and every circumstance, in each and every opportunity. As was said earlier, we've been on Tuesday to Allentown. Senator Miller, thank you. And believe it or not, Dr. Watlington, they have older school buildings in Allentown than they do in Philadelphia, okay? I thought I saw Ben Franklin's handwriting on the wall somewhere in Allentown. It was some school building that we visited. We've been obviously to Harrisburg yesterday, where we took testimony yesterday here in Philadelphia, and I believe we have 7 other hearings scheduled across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In every corner of the Commonwealth, this Basic Education Funding Commission will be traveling to get the testimony as it relates to the 786-page court ruling from the President Judge of Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania about the generational problem that we have with respect to funding education in Pennsylvania. I would just like to add, as Representative Isaacson said, thank you everybody who's not from the city of Philadelphia who wore their Eagles green. Thank you very much, okay, all right? Who's not from the city of Philadelphia wore their Eagles green. But I would add maybe a line or two from a statement from Sylvia Witherspoon as a social worker, Philadelphia School District Parent Power Interfaith Statewide Education Task Force. As a result of the gun violence, children who attend schools in the Philadelphia School District are full of fear, anxiety, depression, and PTSD. I'll stop there. Statement is real, but they're also full of hope. The children are full of hope, their families are full of hope, the teachers are full of hope, and everyone in those school buildings are full of hope. And that is what we must respond to. The hope, to build on that hope, to build on those dreams that start out in maybe a pre-K program and go all the way up to 12th grade, maybe even a little bit more, to try to turn those dreams into opportunities, into reality. That is the mandate, I believe, from the President Judge in the ruling, and I think that is what we must come out of these conversations with, the intention to helping our children all across Pennsylvania realize their dreams. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. I'll remind members as well as those testifying, we've been running about an hour late on these hearings to date. If you can keep your questions or your testimony as concise as possible and your questions as concise as possible, we'll try and make it through this one only an hour late. The first order of business here is to swear in the testifiers. So will the first group of testifiers please rise? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And if so, indicate by saying I do. Thank you. Let's begin with Dr. Watlington, who's the Superintendent of the School District of Philadelphia.
Good afternoon, Co-Chair, Representative Sturla, Co-Chair Senator Phillips-Hill, and Commission members. Thank you first for the opportunity to provide testimony to the Basic Education Funding Commission. My name is Tony Watlington, and I serve as Superintendent of the School District of Philadelphia Family, as Senator Hughes referenced. Today I come before you with a deep sense of urgency and hope for the future of our students. The Commonwealth's children are our most precious resource, and it is our collective responsibility to ensure that they receive the education they so richly deserve. Nearly 2 years ago, my predecessor, former Superintendent Dr. William Height Jr., and Ori Munson, current Secretary of the Budget and previous Deputy Superintendent and Chief Financial Officer here in the district, took the stand and testified, along with colleagues across the Commonwealth, about the devastating impact of Pennsylvania's inadequate and inequitable school funding. The Pennsylvania public school funding system has inadequately and inequitably funded low-wealth districts for decades. The funding system systematically harmed the very districts that need the most resources to support student populations, those districts who serve students with the greatest needs. These students are the future of Pennsylvania, and we are failing to provide for them. This is true across Pennsylvania, but it's certainly also true here in Philadelphia, where we are continually forced to parse insufficient resources which cannot meet the varying needs of our students and staff. When schools are adequately funded, they can attract and retain highly qualified teachers, provide up-to-date resources and materials, and offer a wide range of extracurricular activities. All of these elements are essential to creating an environment where students can thrive academically. First, I would like to provide you with information on the school district. We are the 8th largest school district in the nation and the largest school district in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We are a community, a family, as the Senator referenced, working together with parents, families, and volunteers and community members to support the limitless potential of students attending our schools. We are proud of the progress that we have made to date. In fact, last school year, we're very pleased that student attendance increased, teacher attendance increased, and the number of students who dropped out of schools decreased. We have also stabilized our finances and made targeted investments. Since 2017, we have regained local control of the school district, and our bond rating has been upgraded to investment grade for the first time since 1977. And last spring, we are very pleased that the district's ratings outlook was upgraded from stable to positive by both Moody's Investor Services and Fitch Ratings. With new funding from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the City of Philadelphia, we invested in our students and our schools. We also invested in school buildings by modernizing classrooms, upgrading technology for students and staff, making much needed repairs, and remediating environmental hazards. Over the next 5 years, the district will spend north of $2.5 billion to improve our learning environments, including the construction of 3 new school buildings and nearly $450 million in major renovations. At every Board of Education meeting, we hear from the public about the pressing need to invest in our staff, our facilities, and instructional resources. We know and agree investing in these areas has been shown to increase the academic success and the well-being of students and staff. Last year, during my first 100 days in office, I conducted 90 listening and learning sessions across the city of Philadelphia and issue a survey that engaged nearly 3,000 community stakeholders. Through this extensive community engagement, I had the opportunity to engage with students, families, educators, school leaders, central office staff, school-based staff, faith-based leaders, business leaders, philanthropic community, and our nonprofit organizations, and advocacy and community groups. Following those 90 listening and learning sessions within the first 100 days, we assembled a transition team to harness the collective power of more than 100 Philadelphians, including a few local and national K-12 education experts. Specifically, the team was composed of students, parents, teachers, city leaders, district leaders, union leaders, national educational leaders, city leaders, business and nonprofit leaders, grassroots leaders, and other school district of Philadelphia staff, inclusive of parents. These members brought their local knowledge, experiences, and expertise to review quantitative and qualitative data and information, educational research, and best practices to develop recommendations to shape the future of this school district. The third phase of my transition process focused on the development of a 5-year aggressive strategic plan. More than 200 members of the district community participated in 3 groups that contributed to the development of the school district's new 5-year strategic plan entitled Accelerate Philly. The strategic plan draws on the themes that emerged from the listening and learning tour, the recommendations from my transition team report, and the personal experiences of the individuals who participated in the strategic planning process. Through that collaboration, the strategic plan identifies 5 priority areas and 63 key strategic actions that we will take over the next 5 years. I have submitted the plan as an additional document to the Commission. Priority 1 under this strategic plan involves improving safety and well-being, meaning physical safety, social and emotional safety, and certainly environmental safety. We recognize that safe environments are critical to our students and staff being able to learn and grow. This includes physical, social, emotional, and environmental safety, and that is why we have identified 11 strategic actions to improve this area, but we'll be focusing on implementing 2 key strategic actions this school year. Strategic Action 1.1, and it's not insignificant that this is the first strategic action in the entire strategic plan, quote, establish a facilities master plan project team, including internal and external stakeholders, to identify a process and the investments needed to significantly improve academic achievement and achieve the Board of Education's goals and guardrails 1 and 2. Strategic Action 1.2, improve management of environmental conditions and hazards by hiring an administrator and investing in modern data management system. We know our aging school infrastructure needs significant upgrades, as the average age of our school buildings is 73 years old, and some of our school buildings are in excess of 120 years old. In 2017, Parsons completed a facility conditions assessment report for the school district, which identified the structural issues in each of our school buildings. The study identified $4.9 billion of deferred maintenance across the school district's facilities, a cost that has certainly grown with inflation over the past few years. To build 21st century learning environments our students and staff so richly deserve, was estimated to cost north of $7.9 billion in 2017 dollars. The skills and knowledge needed for success in today's world are vastly different than what was required just a few decades ago. We must adapt and provide our students with modern, innovative learning environments that reflect the realities of the world that they will enter upon graduation. Philadelphia students deserve 21st century learning environments equipped with state-of-the-art technology, appropriate science labs, and the absolute very best instructional resources. They deserve classrooms that foster creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and problem-solving skills. They need opportunities to engage in STEM, science, technology, and engineering and mathematics education, the arts, and vocational training. These experiences will prepare them for the diverse and rapidly changing job market that awaits them, both in Philadelphia, the local economy, and beyond. Sustained funding means bringing air conditioning to all schools, including the 57% of our schools that currently do not have adequate air conditioning, such that we can keep students in school during the summer to help prevent that phenomenon called the summer slide. In buildings as old as ours, this not only means purchasing air conditioners, but also upgrading the electrical capacity and examining potential environmental impacts of installing these air conditioners in window units. In addition, we know that children across the Commonwealth are struggling with mental health as return to school after the COVID pandemic, or during the next phase of the COVID pandemic, I should say. At the school district, we are committed to caring for the mental health and well-being of our students and offering them the opportunities to care for themselves. That is why we launched Cooth Health this year, an online mental health and well-being platform designed to provide access to personalized, confidential, digital mental health and well-being resources. Since February, hundreds of Philadelphia students have experienced the benefits of Cooth. They have accessed the online counseling, used the peer-to-peer support features, shared digital resources, and more. We will continue to encourage our students to use Cooth if and when they need it. At the school district, we are striving to achieve the Board of Education's goals and guardrails as we aspire to become the fastest improving large urban school district in the country. And we know exactly what to do under our new 5-year aggressive strategic plan entitled Accelerate Philly. And I'm pleased to share, just to hold up a copy for you, and I think you have a copy in your materials. However, we need adequate funding and resources to deliver. According to PA Schools' work, adequate state funding for Philadelphia would mean an additional $5,015 per student. This infusion of funding would enable our students to have the same opportunities of high-quality education as their peers across this great Commonwealth. With the additional funding, as a district, we would be positioned to shift the conversation from how to invest limited resources to how we accelerate academic achievement by focusing on robust academic programming that takes place in 21st century learning environments. We asked this committee to give the students of Philadelphia the funding this committee recommended in 2016 so that all Pennsylvania students have equal opportunity to achieve. The fair funding trial showed that equitable and adequate funding for education in Pennsylvania is truly a statewide issue that affects all of us, not just those in Philadelphia. Over 428 school districts in our Commonwealth are not receiving an adequate share of funding from the state of Pennsylvania. We are also asking this committee and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to ensure that every child, regardless of their background, has access to a high-quality education that prepares them for success in the 21st century. Our children absolutely deserve an educational landscape where every student can reach their full potential and contribute to the prosperity and growth of their community and to this Commonwealth. I thank you for the opportunity to testify. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next up, we have Christopher Dormer, Superintendent of the Norristown School District.
Thank you, Co-Chair Representative Sturla. Good afternoon, Co-Chair Senator Phillips-Hill, distinguished members of the Commission. I am Christopher Dormer. I'm extremely proud to be the Superintendent of Schools of the Norristown Area School District in Montgomery County. I'm also proud to be the President of the Pennsylvania League of Urban Schools, the Plus Caucus of PASA, which represents 29 school districts and nearly 300,000 students across Pennsylvania. And thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about our story in Norristown. Norristown Area School District is one of the most diverse and one of the most underfunded school districts in the Commonwealth. This underfunding has forced us to endure a 10-year period of what I will call the 3 deadly sins of school budgeting. raising local property taxes at or above your Act 1 index, cutting staff and reducing programs, and spending our limited fund balance to nearly zero to balance the annual budget. You're not going to inspire much faith in your school system when you're asking your community to pay more to get less. As the state has significantly increased education funding the past few years, our fortunes have changed. We've had 3 consecutive budgets now in a row with a 0% tax increase, and we've been able to reinstate and add 80 staff positions. And just to give you some context, we are not nearly as big as my colleague school district here. We are about 8,000 students, and we're just shy of 1,000 employees. So an increase of 80 is significant in our world. Smaller class sizes, targeted instructional supports, one-to-one technology for all students, and investments in new curricular resources have resulted in accelerated growth, learning, and achievement. We've experienced that direct correlation that increased funding has resulted in increased student achievement. So it begs the question, what would full funding look like, and what would the impact be for a district like Norristown? Fully funding our public schools would provide us the needed resources to meet the needs of each and every student with rigor, relevance, relationships, and equity. Just one example of what this looks like, just this year, increased state funding allowed us to invest in new mathematics instructional materials for all students kindergarten through 12th grade to support the teaching of a new math curriculum that we were implementing. In just 1 year, and I'm very proud to share this past year, our elementary PSSA proficiency increased by a full 10 percentage points. Not a 10% gain, a 10% jump in proficiency. Our middle school PSSA proficiency increased 5 percentage points. We're extremely proud of this success as an outcome of a multi-year curriculum development and professional development process, but we acknowledge there is still much work to do. Sustained funding increases will allow us to scale this process and an ongoing data-driven improvement cycle in all content areas in future years. Additional funding increases will allow us to continue to hire more staff to serve as an example, the growing population of English learners in our district, which have increased over 104% over the past decade. Full funding would continue that correlation to increased achievement as each and every student will experience more personalized and individualized learning so they can meet additionally our profile of a graduate to show that they are life ready upon graduation. Additional funding will allow us to consider new and innovative ways to move every student forward that build on and celebrate their strengths and their personal stories. Full funding would allow us to modernize our facilities for current and future generations. Our newest school building, Whitehall Elementary School, which sits right next to my office, opened in 1992. Our next newest building, the Norristown Area High School, just celebrated its 50th opening. Our last large-scale renovation project expanded the capacity at East Norton Middle School 17 years ago. We recently engaged an architectural firm to complete a feasibility study and help us develop a master facilities plan. We just received the preliminary results of that, and they've identified over $200 million in needed renovations and upgrades that will be needed in our 13 buildings in just the next 10 years. Full funding will make our schools viable for the next generation of learners. Full funding would allow us also to provide much needed property tax relief to our community. We have many senior citizens who have been forced out of their homes because they can no longer afford their school tax bills on a fixed income. The high tax rate also makes it difficult to attract new families to our community when you can buy a similar sized house with literally half the tax bill just one school district over. Mandated costs such as PSERS payments, special education costs, mandated charter and cyber charter school payments will continue to drive up local property taxes without additional state funding. Fully funding public education will allow us to reduce our millage and to reduce zip code as a differentiator in education. The recent increases in state funding have been put to good use in the Norristown Area School District and have improved the academic performance the improved academic performance of students has followed, although we still have much, much, much more to do. So what would full funding mean for our students, staff, and families? Opportunity, equity. Full funding would allow us to meet each and every student where they are and provide them with a modern, personalized, and individualized education program that prepares them for life. In closing, I thank each member of the Commission for your involvement and participation in this important work, not only to determine a response to the Commonwealth Court ruling and what it means to constitutionally fund public schools, but more importantly, to chart path forward with education funding and adequacy as they relate to equity and opportunities for each and every child in Pennsylvania to allow them to realize a bright future. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from members? Anyone? Senator Hughes?
Just so happened to, okay. First, I see two House colleagues here in the room. Three House colleagues, you want to?
Yes. Thank you, Representative Joe Webster and Representative Dorisha Parker and Representative Morgan Cephas for joining us today. Oh, and Napoleon Nelson. I didn't see him.
So that's not my question, Mr. Chairman, all right? Dr. Watlington, a lot of conversation has been related over the last couple of days in our hearings have related directly to mostly a lot to school facilities, and obviously a lot of that those are things that receive much of the attention publicly. You see a building, you have to close down, what have you. The crisis that we unfortunately had to confront, not just in Philadelphia, but in school districts around the Commonwealth, many of them participants in the lawsuit in our first week of school. But to the issue around academic loss or lost opportunity, especially to those high school students, there's 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th graders who have had the unfortunate reality of starting maybe pre-K or kindergarten, going all the way up to 9th grade. So 10 or 11 years of attempting to get an education in an underfunded and an unconstitutional system for a good 10 years of their life or so. What kind of programming or support services or whatever has to be done to be put in place to respond to this neglect? I mean, it's one thing if you're first grade or kindergarten or what have you, minds are still forming, there's interventions that can be put in place, but when you're in that advanced stage of academics, what has to be put in place to get these young people where we need them to be?
Thank you, Senator. When you think about the cumulative effect year after year from kindergarten through 8th or 9th grade for students who've been under-resourced, it means we have to redouble and more than double our efforts to provide services, supports, not limited to extra help before and after school and on weekends. We have to invest more resources in teacher development and training, since highly qualified, well-supported teachers are the #1 indicator. Certainly, we have to make sure to upgrade our facilities so that when we want to bring our children in for the summer, to give them that double dose of reading, math, and to extend the runway, if you will, for the school year so they can try to have at least a chance to begin to catch up. That means we have to take those 57% of school buildings that don't have adequate air conditioning and get them air conditioned sooner rather than later so that our young people can continue to grow in the summer and not experience a summer slide year after year after year. I've heard you once refer to that as the academic pandemic, and I think that's been one of the greatest impacts. It also means that we have to provide more programmatic support to support them with their social and emotional development. It is not the soft stuff. Depression, anxiety, and the like are real. Students tell me all the time. And so I think it's really important that we hear their voices. All of those impacts mean that it requires additional resources to address the cumulative effect for older children who did not get the resources they've needed for a number of years.
I'm assuming that to the extent that you have the capacity to maybe even get us some kind of numbers attached to what it would look like to put that kind of system in place, not only for you, but I assume that the same has to be held the same for Norristown as well. What would that mean to put that kind of system in place, those extra supports, those extra resources, not just for our young ones, but those 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, that cohort?
Absolutely. I'll just say, and I'll defer to my colleague, Superintendent, when I think about the $5,015 investment that the PA Works report shared, it would allow us to deliver on the 5 priority areas in this strategic plan that we were very intentional about building over the course of a year. And just very quickly, Senator, those 5 specific areas would be to improve safety and well-being, priority area 2, to partner with families and community. We would ramp up a number of initiatives and efforts to help parents so that they're better able to help their children, because we know our parents want better. Priority area 3, certainly around accelerating achievement, investing in teachers, reading specialists where appropriate, expanding the school year and the amount of time for learning. Priority area 4, we would expand our efforts to recruit and retain highly qualified staff, not limited to just teachers, but educators in a number of areas. And then 5, we would use those resources to deliver efficient, high quality, and cost-effective operations, which is our priority area 5.
Thank you. Senator Hughes, I think I want to speak specifically, as we're kind of alluding to, the mental health component, which we know, students, families, probably all of us are still recovering from. When I became superintendent in Norristown, just starting my 6th year there, when I first came to Norristown as assistant superintendent, in a district of nearly 8,000, we had 1 social worker for nearly 8,000 kids. And that person also doubled as a supervisor of pupil services. So couldn't even focus solely on the mental health component as a social worker. One of the things we look to address, because we saw it as a major significant need, particularly as we navigated the pandemic, came out of the pandemic. But when you look at a district over 10 prior years that was growing in enrollment, and I talked about the 10 years where we were cutting. So we grew by about 12% enrollment. We went from 7,000 to almost 8,000 in a 10-year period. At the same time, we're reducing staff. So making decisions about classrooms came before mental health supports. We've taken some opportunities in knowing that we have this need now to look at, we'll say, the one-time money of how can we leverage that. And it's been difficult because we know social workers and counselors and mental health workers are things we're going to need today, tomorrow, and moving forward. But a couple years ago, we were faced with an opportunity through that first round of PCCD money, where they did allow districts under safety. How can we improve safety, improve the mental wellness of students? And we were one of the districts that took that money and actually contracted for mental health support because we recognized that there was an expiration date on that. And I did not want to hire somebody, incur those costs to have to let them go or potentially let them go down the road. So for a district of 8,000, we took, I want to say it was about $750,000 in grant money and turned that into about a 3-year contracted service agreement to bring 5 mental health workers on. 5 is better than 1. 6 is better than 1. But I think it speaks to the need of, one of the areas we would like to continue to invest in Norristown is to move from that contracted service where every year, every couple years, we kind of have this calendar of this PCCD grant's going to expire. How do we backfill? Because we can't let those 5 people and the services they bring disappear. We've used some of our ESSER money to enhance that. We've done some creative things through some contracted services where they've said, if you purchase like out-of-district placement slots for that they would afford us some mental health workers there. But again, all of this is difficult to plan forward with in a very intentional manner when it is expiring money. So to me, again, one of the things I think, in terms of when I look at full funding, when I look at increased funding, is that we can take those things and make them a permanent fixture because we know that they're things that we're going to need moving forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. I'll note quickly that we've also been joined by Representative Heather Boyd and Representative Kristen Marcel. Representative Schweier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very quickly, I don't think that this has to be a particularly long part of the conversation. I was struck, Dr. Watlington, by the thoughtfulness of your plan. It's defensible. It was thorough. It was public, and it involved the public in making that plan. Something that very quickly kind of struck me as the kind of process that many of our underfunded school districts should be taking to make sure not only that your local taxpayers, but the Commonwealth as the biggest investor in many of our school districts should see as a verification comfort level for the amount of funding that we currently and are looking at potentially adding to education. So I commend you and I commend your team for that. I was really very positively impressed by the result of that process. I also think your goals are obtainable, aspirational for sure, but they're obtainable. It's the kind of stuff that we can be doing so long as you have the right funding. So I'm going to pivot real quick, Mr. Dormer. I'm going to ask you not to use your Norristown hat, but if you could use your PASA hat, the school administrators. Is that kind of process something that you see routinely? Is there a standard operating procedure that is used by districts? Again, if we're going to be adding $6 billion or some number thereabout to schools, there's going to need to be a significant amount of comfort level on our side that those tax dollars are being used appropriately. So what kind of processes do you see across from all of your colleagues across the Commonwealth to ensure that we can get this level of product so that we can feel comfortable with that?
Certainly. Thank you, Representative Schweier. And I'm going to look right over here at my colleagues at the Pennsylvania Department of Education. One of the things that I think has greatly improved in my time in education has been the PDE required, what used to be the strategic plan and is now the district level comprehensive planning process. We are a phase 2 district. We actually are in process for renewing our 3-year plan. And one of the pieces where you talk about that public involvement is a required component of that district strategic plan. We have to involve parents, community members, business owners, students, in addition to teachers. All walks of life are required to be part of that plan. It is a very collaborative process. And then for those that can't, there are benchmarks throughout the way of where we're asking for feedback. We're sending out surveys in terms of, I know there's a portion of kind of almost like the commitment statements where parents in part of this plan will agree to do X. And with that, Representative Suarez just said, you need to have a mechanism to involve the totality of your community. In a district like Norristown that's 15 square miles, 80,000, I'd say it's a little bit easier than a system as large as the School District of Philadelphia. It's still daunting to make sure that all 80,000 voices in the School District of Norristown area are heard. However, it is a required part of the process with PDE. I was very fortunate that when I walked in today, a member of Dr. Watlington's team handed me their output document because I think as great as the PDE process is, again, it is quite a volume in terms of all the steps you have to go through. But I think PDE already has that process in place that is required of all 500 school districts. And one of the final benchmarks before it even goes to board approval is a 28-day public really unveiling and a public review period. So before the board any school board can even sign off on it, they have to advertise it and say, this document is open, we're getting ready to approve this. This is going to drive us forward for minimally the next 3 years, and we want to make sure the community supports this before we put our vote to this. That is, again, going to be everything from mission, vision, values, to those action plan and those attainable goals of how we're going to spend our money, how money is going to drive to attain goals and outcomes over a period of time.
So a very quick yes or no, or very close to it as possible. we can expect this level of work from all of our school districts if there's additional funding from a public standpoint, from a ability for folks to be able to review it, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Topper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen. Dr. Watlington, we were in my office one day, we were talking about student achievement, and whether we're looking to put student achievement metrics into a formula, or whether we're looking at having a formula that would react to local school districts putting in student achievement metrics. Let's take standardized testing out of the equation, because we know a lot of that is federally driven and it is what it is. But what would be metrics that in either of your school districts that would kind of set, look, these are ones that we feel really delineate where we're going, and if we have the achievement that we're hoping to meet year in and year out?
Thank you, Representative Topper. I would say outside of traditional standardized testing like the PSSAs and Keystones, I would say metrics like significant improvements in student attendance, significant improvements in teacher attendance, depending on where districts' baseline data lay. I would say the percentage of students who complete the FAFSA application that puts them in a position to be able to go to a 2 or 4 year institution, which is not the easiest thing to do historically, quite frankly. I would also say the ACT is probably one of those measures that's not prescribed as much federally or at the state level, but it's probably one of the better assessments to use to see where we are at the end of the day, particularly the parts related to career and technical education and the core academic areas.
Thank you, Representative Topper. Good to see you. I think there are 3 things that we are really trying to hone in on Norristown right now, in addition to, again, how we're seeing advances in proficiency on those standardized tests. One is using a combination, again, of those standardized tests and some local assessments, that students are achieving more than a year's growth in a year's time. I think that is so important that every student is continually making progress, whether they are on track, ahead, or maybe there is a gap. Particularly for those students that are behind, we're looking at metrics of is that gap shrinking is where they are supposed to be. So for instance, if you have a 7th grade student that is reading on a 5th grade level, by the end of 8th grade, I still don't want them 2 or 3 years behind. I want to see that gap close. And that is something I think we can articulate and measure very intentionally, that we're closing those achievement gaps. I know usually achievement gaps are associated with groups of students, but I think you can look at that on a very individual level, and I think we have the tools and mechanisms to do that as schools. The third one, very intentionally, we're very proud that, and I know a lot of districts have gone this direction of locally adopting a profile of a graduate, which is, to me, what does that diploma mean when a student leaves? Outside of they attain credits and now they met Act 158, what are the skills and knowledge that the kids should have? What does that diploma mean to a college, to an employer, to the military? And to me, we've set within our current plan not only to develop that profile of the graduate, which I believe we're going to present to our school board this month, but that we have in very short order that 100% of our students will meet that profile. To me, that's an ultimate outcome in terms of education and in terms of what does that diploma mean in terms of life readiness and really being a contributing member of society.
And I like that, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do as well. What before we determine which silos and how we create, even if it's a new silo to drive money out, obviously we first have to establish what the goals are, right? What will be, what are we looking to achieve as we create, if it's whatever new system or tweaks to a system or overhaul of a system, we need to establish achievement goals first, and then that can a lot of times drive financial goals as well. And I know both of you have done that in your districts, and I appreciate that conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Isaacson.
Thank you, and thank you for your thoughtful testimony today. You spoke of a 3-year plan, and Representative Topper was just talking about the benchmarks and how we can evaluate if we're going to redo, reimagine, or whatever we're going to decide to do with the system, and as we're trying to achieve the funding goals that were obviously identified by the courts. And the differences have changed from when the court testimony, expert testimony was given during the trial of the case. They were at like $4 billion, and now we're already up to 6. So everything is ever changing. One of the things that was not discussed, and I'm going to go here a little bit, Dr. Watlington, because I know that Philadelphia has tried to deal with our facilities issue. But we also know what we read in the papers and what is brought out about the situations in many of the school buildings. My district here, as we're down here in it, we're very landlocked. There is no place to buy land for a brand new school, so we must do rehabilitations, which is true for many areas of the city. Could you talk about more in depth of how we're dealing with some of these environmental issues? Because when you close down schools because of the asbestos and lead, not only are you sending the teachers and the students home, but we're having the trauma of that, the learning loss that comes with that. And it's something, while it was not part of the figure used in this Commonwealth Court decision, we were told by the expert, it's another pot and another issue that we need to address, because the facilities is as important as our guiding plans.
Thank you, Representative Isaacson. I'll say that relative to the 2017 Parsons report that said the cost to upgrade the facilities here in the School District of Philadelphia would be somewhere north of $7.89 billion. The district has not been asleep at the wheel or just sitting on our hands, I can assure you that. Approximately a third of those federal ARPA dollars, north of $350 million, have been used to address facilities here. So the significant chunk of those dollars have been used to include the construction of 3 new, and not limited to the construction of 3 new schools. There have been some upgrades in many places across the district. Two, the School District of Philadelphia has really accelerated its work to not only complete the federally required 3-year AHERA inspections. We're on schedule. We're slightly ahead of schedule, so we're current with those inspections as well as the 6-month checkups. One of the reasons we had to close some schools last year is because we're getting really good at that protocol, and we're on time and on schedule. And so we're addressing those issues very transparently when they occur. The district has been working on a swing space plan, so not if, but when we run into the next case, we can get kids back into in-person learning more quickly. And then I'll also say, relative to the 57% of schools that don't have adequate air conditioning, that we have to close them early during the summer months. We've installed over 800 air conditioners, well over 1,100 water filtration systems, so students and faculty can have access to filtered, cool water in those schools. So there's a lot of work that's occurring in the district that I'm not sure we always get credit for. And I think that's really important to note, having moved here from a little further south where it gets a little hotter and where those districts were not Rockefeller rich, but they certainly figured out how, at least the ones that I worked in, figured out how to get all of their schools appropriately air conditioned in the summer months and appropriately heated in the winter months. And looking forward to us doing the same here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And just to note, because I know Senator Phillips-Hill has been very succinct on this, and I agree with her on this point. I appreciate you use the ARPA money, but it's a one-time spend, and we need to make sure, as we're addressing this and working this into our formulas and what is needed, that every school district, one, has updated plans and with regard to their facilities and the rehabilitation of them, and also updated numbers, because you said 2017, 2023. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Senator Phillips-Hill.
Thank you, Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you. Dr. Watlington, congratulations. I think you provided the greatest number of pages of testimony than any other testifier we have had yet to date, and I have read every single page of it. And really, this Accelerate Philly strategic plan summary that you have given us is really copious. But to really follow up on Representative Isaacson's question with regard to facilities, we're hearing a lot about facilities. Do you have a long-range facilities plan, and have you identified the cost and the amount of money that will be dedicated to it each year? I went through this plan, priority area 5.10. You talk about the need to recruit executives who have knowledge and expertise who can assist you and your chief operating officer on your facilities challenges. But I didn't see anything in there about a plan, much like you have, you have great ideas in here about how you're planning to benchmark student academic achievement and many other things. But is that just something that has not been included in your Accelerate Philly summary?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I'd say two things. First, we are developing, our development is in process of a project team that will result in a long-range facilities master plan. We're taking the appropriate time to get lots of internal and external stakeholders around the table so that when the plan is finalized, it is thorough, it's impactful, and that it, as best we can, outlines costs. The reason you see that strategy in Area 5 of our strategic plan about recruiting some additional talent and expertise in the district, this past year we asked the Council for Great City Schools, the organization in Washington, D.C. that represents some 77 largest school districts, urban school districts in the country. We asked them to come to Philadelphia and to do an audit of our organizational structure because we wanted to get feedback about how we can be leaner, how we can be more effective. Long story short, the auditors told us that relative to other districts our size across the country, we have a very lean staff. The central office is understaffed. This notion that somehow people think that large districts are bureaucratic, there's a lot of fat around the belt, it is patently false. The council audit was clear. In fact, we're on the lower end of staffing, and it's a vestige of when there were some serious cuts made to this district around a decade ago that, quite frankly, the district has never completely rebounded from. So we are very understaffed, under-resourced relative to other districts this size nationally, and so we wanted to be very transparent about our desire to recruit some additional help in some of these areas. Notwithstanding that need, I think we've made some significant investments, and we've been good stewards of the public tax dollars relative to doing the best we can with our facility challenges.
So you anticipate that this is something that you will be working through in the future. Mr. Dorner, do you have a facilities plan? You talked about the age of your schools, and have you identified the costs and how you anticipate addressing those?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Phillips-Hill. We are actually in the process of developing that master facilities plan. We're currently working with an architectural firm. They just completed the feasibility study, so they literally walked every square inch of our school district, met with our principals. They took a look at our enrollment, compared capacity. So right now, the number I shared, again, was a preliminary figure. They've put, just to do renovations and upgrades in 13 buildings is a little bit north of $200 million. There's another phase to this project which we're going to start in 2 weeks, which is, and one of the reasons we selected this particular firm is they're using a community workshop model where they're going to engage all the different voices in our community, our school board, our administrative team, teachers, parents, students, support staff, community organizations to say, what do you want our schools to look like in the future? So we anticipate probably by the close of the calendar year into early 2024, they'll come back with a recommendation document that then we will turn into an action plan for our Facilities and Finance Committee to make a determination of looking at what our current capital reserve sits at, and what is our plan going to be moving forward to address those needs. I think one thing of note, which is interesting, is that the recommendations right now are, again, just based on remediation and upgrades. I think, Representative Isaacson made a mention with Dr. Watlington about one of the challenges in this neighborhood about, real estate to build new. I think one of the challenges we're going to be looking at, although we do have some spaces maybe to build, and I'll just use this as one example that, again, where the community workshop I think is going to be an integral part of that. One of my middle schools, the Charles L. Bloxon Middle School, is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary in about a year and a half. The building is not ADA compliant at all. So in the current feasibility study, there's about $4 million to install elevators on this, on this 3-level building with half stops, and to put in accessible ramps, probably for another $1 million or $2 million. And at that point, I think we're going to be engaged in a very interesting conversation. Is it more fiscally responsible in terms of our vision and use of dollars to add $5 to $6 to $7 million and slap on Band-Aids, or to make a $7 million down payment on a new school?
And I appreciate that. I know that a lot of school districts have similar thought processes and challenges. I will say that I really appreciate the process that both of your districts are engaging in particular, making sure that parents' voices are heard. They're entrusting their children to you, and empowering parents is always a good thing. So I appreciate that. If I could, in your thought process, I mean, we will be continuing to engage through November, but obviously the General Assembly will always be very interested in, what your needs are and how we can work together in this system of education. I think it would be helpful for us to understand if you believe that opening up PlanCon would be a realistic solution to your building challenges. And ultimately, how much could you feasibly spend on building projects annually, given administrative and workforce constraints? Those are some things that, as we contemplate facilities challenges here in the Commonwealth, I think those kinds of insights from not just your districts, but in your capacity, Superintendent Dorner, from all of your districts, I think would be helpful as we engage in this process.
If I could answer the PlanCon question succinctly, yes.
Very good.
It is a tool that we have been, I think, superintendents have been asking for a number of years, and I think we'd like to see it reactivated with funding to help us with some immediacy.
I appreciate that input today. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. Senator Williams?
And I'll try to keep this brief. Following up on the PlanCon, that's been flat funded for years, there is not, I would imagine that there's not a not insignificant cost to planning for facilities, bringing on staff, doing that 2017 study that I know you weren't here for, but all of those studies, consulting architectures, figuring out a facilities plan, takes time of your staff and costs some money. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so it costs money, and you have no guarantee that you're getting any money from the state to do what you plan to do. Thank you.
Thanks. So it's time for the next panel, but I'm going to ask some questions anyway. Actually, it's time for the third panel, not the second panel, but I'm going to ask some questions anyway. Superintendent Dormer, you pointed out that because of the fact that you are one of the higher taxing districts in the state, and it's because you lack funding from the state, that if you actually got adequate funding from the state, you would eventually, once you got all your student needs taken care of, you would lower some taxes. I just want that to be on the record, because the concern has always been, well, you'll just go spend the money again on something else. I don't think any school district purposefully tries to be one of the highest taxing districts in the state. I think you would gladly, if you can take care of your students, you'd gladly give some money back to your local taxpayers.
Representative Sterling, I'll happily go on record that if the Norristown Area School District was fully funded, we would afford our taxpayers a tax break and would reduce the millage.
Okay, thanks. So now to a couple of the other questions I have. We talked about increased student achievement and accountability for that. And that's something this panel has talked about a lot, and I know is a concern of a lot of members. I believe that there are metrics that you can measure that student achievement. The question I have is, and this goes back to, this shows my age, back during the Ridge administration, when we had distressed schools and they said the students aren't achieving, and as a result we're going to take money away from the school that wasn't achieving. So the question is, if we put in metrics to measure achievement and somebody meets that measure, we keep funding them? Do we give them extra? If they don't meet that measure, do we take money away? Do we punish them? Do we, what's the result of the accountability and the fact that we can measure that? And I'm truly, I have no clue of what the answer to that should be, but I'm looking for some sort of input and guidance as to where we might go, because I believe we are going to have accountability and metrics that measure. I just don't know what we do with that after we measure it.
I'll take the first stab at that, Dr. Dormer, unless you want to do it. No. Okay. I think that in part because of the infusion of the federal ARPA dollars, I can say conclusively 3 things in the School District of Philadelphia. That, in tandem with the Board of Education's intense focus on its goals and guardrails and monitoring it at every single school board meeting, 3 things have happened. Number 1, if you look at the NAEP test across Philadelphia and other large urban districts, the drop in NAEP performance was not anywhere as steep in Philadelphia as compared to other large cities in the United States, number 1. Number 2, because of that intense focus on goals and guardrails and being good stewards of the influx of additional resources, that did matter. We anticipate when the data are verified this fall that we will make some appreciable improvement in 3rd grade reading performance, in 3rd grade and 3 through 8 math performance this school year, the past previous year, and that we'll see across the board improvement in science. And we know that this last school year, our teacher attendance rate went up by nearly 6.5 percentage points. Student attendance, meaning those teachers and students that were in school 90% of the month for the entire year. For students, it increased by 3 percentage points and about 6.5 percentage points for teachers. So, and the number of students who dropped out of school was decreased by 265 young people. If you ask me, if we pull all those resources away, will we be at risk for some schools sliding back? I would say absolutely. It's no different than a losing football team that you put resources in and you recruit some of the best quarterback and players, and then in 2 years you stop funding that football team. I'll tell you that record's going to go down. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Representative Searle, I concur with a lot of the comments of Dr. Watlington that certainly with increased funding there should come accountability. We are commissioned officers as superintendents, public officials, and we're talking about taxpayer dollars. And to me, there's no greater responsibility than we have to be good stewards of that money. But going back to kind of what Representative Topper said, I think we need to take a more holistic look at the data that we use and try to infuse multiple measures in that accountability. You know, because to me, as important as PSSA Keystone data is, it tells you how a student did on that one day based on that one measure. And I think, you know, if we want to talk about accountability, we have to look at multiple measures that do different things, that also include things, and I've heard Representative Topper talk about this exclusively, about what does it mean when you graduate high school, that life readiness piece. How do we fold that in as a measure of accountability? Because ultimately that should be, you know, I talk a lot about this in my community. That to me is the ultimate measure of a school system. It's not, again, did you get, you know, my district, did you get 23.5 credits in check in Act 158 box? How many of our kids went on to college meaningfully, work, military, trade school? That to me is, you know, what does that diploma mean? And I think there should be ways to measure that. I would say with, you know, much of what Dr. Watlington said, I would concur with. which is right now we have Norristown as an underfunded district. We have a lot of work to do. We're starting to see those gains. My fear would be having a system that is too punitive if growth doesn't happen too quickly. Because again, we're talking about human beings. And every kid learns differently and has a different path. I'll very quickly talk about my 11-year-old, who is incredible. The kid learns in fits and spurts. Every fall, I walk into parent-teacher conferences. We're worried, you know, it's this and that. And then every April, the teacher's going, she is doubling the growth rate of every kid in school. Because that's who she is. But that's her journey. And I think as we look at funding schools, and I talked a lot about personalization and individualization, that's what we need to do. We need to empower kids to a set of standards and to accountability, but how do we get them to go on their own path to where they want to go in the future?
Okay, thank you. And I had personal experience with that. My kids went to a highly underperforming school, but what we determined was it was also the one that was the feeder school for the biggest homeless shelter in the district, and they had a 70% turnover of students during the year. So the test scores were reflective of people who had shown up the day before, the week before, the month before, things like that. So two other quick issues. One, Dr. Watlington, you talked about the physical safety of students, and something I've been pushing since the last Basic Ed Funding Commission is funding for crossing guards, because if I live in a suburban or a rural area, I get reimbursed for getting my kids safely to school. It's called a school bus. If I live in an urban area, my kids are expected to walk, and the way I get them there safely to cross roads that have 100,000 cars a day and through drug and gun infested neighborhoods is to make sure I have crossing guards, and the state doesn't reimburse you 1 cent. Last time I checked, your school crossing guard bill in the city of Philadelphia was around $12 million a year. Would it help if you got reimbursed for some of that?
I'll get you back on schedule, Representative Skurley. Yes.
Okay. And then the final question, and this deals with funding for school buildings, because in most cases, the schools that have the worst buildings are the ones that have been chronically underfunded. That also means that because they're chronically underfunded, they have bad bond ratings, they have all sorts of issues like that. Would it help immensely if the state, which now has a good bond rating and has surplus dollars, would it help if the state was the one that issued all the bonds for school construction and just gave you that rate?
Anything the state wants to do to help us on the local level, Representative Sturla, I think will be very happy to do. I will tell you, in my time in Norristown, I talked about that 10-year period, and as funding has increased, we have, as Dr. Watlington shared in Philly, we've really worked hard to increase our credit rating so that when the funding comes, we're going to be ready to go.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. We are only an hour and 5 minutes late at this point in time. So we're going to get to panel 2. Arthur Steinberg, President of the American Federation of Teachers of Pennsylvania, Jerry Jordan, President of the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers, Ashley Cocca, School Counselor with the School District of Philadelphia, and Fatoumata Sidibe, I don't know how to pronounce that, student with the William W. Bodine High School. If you all come forward, I'll get you sworn in. I will ask the audience to, if possible, refrain as much from possible as clapping. We know that you all support the people that with their testimonies. We're just so pressed for time. We're really trying to push through this as quickly as possible. All right. Can I get you all to stand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And if so, indicate by saying, I do. Thank you. All right, we'll begin with Arthur Steinberg.
Good afternoon, members of the General Assembly and designees of Governor Shapiro's administration. Thank you for allowing me to testify today to the needs of our schools in addressing childhood trauma and mental health. I am Arthur Steinberg, president of AFT Pennsylvania, the state chapter of the American Federation of Teachers, which proudly represents about 36,000 teachers, paraprofessionals, school staff, higher education faculty and staff, and state workers across 64 local unions. As this committee considers the basic funding needs of the Commonwealth's 499 school districts, it is vital to understand the ever-changing needs of our students that are a result of chronic underfunding. It is the underfunding of our schools that made it difficult or impossible to safely return to in-person learning throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. It is the underfunding of our schools that makes it difficult to attract and retain teachers in the profession. And it is the underfunding of our schools that has ultimately not supplied the support systems needed to improve the mental health of our young people. An underfunding that, as you know, our courts have deemed unconstitutional. The depth and breadth of the student mental health crisis may not yet be determined, but it is our members, educators, paraprofessionals, staff, and school counselors who bear the brunt of these effects every single day. In fact, more than 75% of schools surveyed last year said their teachers and staff had voiced concerns about student depression, anxiety, and trauma. In addition to the disconnectedness experienced by students during the pandemic, the ongoing gun violence epidemic causes continued harm to the mental health of our students, whether they live in a community ravaged by gun violence, have lost a family member to a gun crime, or if they are afraid of the ever too common shootings that occur in schools. Incredibly, some 70% of children in the U.S. who seek and receive mental health support get it at school. But schools struggle to address these needs because of a lack of resources. The recommended ratio is 250 students for every school counselor, but in the U.S. the average is 415 to 1. When it comes to school psychologists, the numbers are much worse. In Pennsylvania, the ratio of students to school psychologists is 1,038 to 1, over twice the recommended number. The good news is that we can change the trajectory of mental health in our schools through smart investment. The American Federation of Teachers' long-held belief is that community schools are a path toward filling the educational, physical, mental health, and equity gaps that have widened and plagued our school system through the lack of funding. Not to be confused with traditional neighborhood public schools, community schools leverage community partnerships to provide on-site wraparound services aligned with student and family needs. Community school buildings are open before school, after school, on weekends and summers. Common aspects of community schools are integrated student supports, expanded learning time and opportunities, family and community engagement, and collaborative leadership and practice. Strong evidence of improving health, including the mental health of students in community schools, comes from the literature on school-based health centers, the model on which community schools are built. These school-based health centers have been shown to contribute to improved access to mental health services for students, which in turn has been associated with students being less likely to use or abuse substances, such as marijuana and alcohol, less likely to carry a weapon, and less likely to fight. Students who use school-based health centers were found to have increased attendance compared to non-users, and students who use mental health services of school-based health centers demonstrated achievement increases compared to non-users. Many of the community schools already exist, including here in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and elsewhere across the nation in cities and towns like Oakland, Boston, Cincinnati, and New York. There are dozens of successful examples of community schools that have helped buoy student achievement and the health of families and communities. But we don't need to go to Oakland, Boston, Cincinnati, or New York for examples of successful community schools. In Pittsburgh, Faison K-5 and Langley Pre-K to 8 are standout examples of programs which focus on academics, enrichment, health and social supports, youth and community development, and family engagement. We would be happy to arrange for members of the committee to go out and visit one of these schools and host a tour for you. I think it would be very enlightening. Funding exists for these services. In fact, the Biden administration has already secured $150 million to assist states and local education agencies with setting up full-service community schools. To address the ongoing and unfortunately increasing mental health needs in our schools, the public education system in Pennsylvania needs to invest in wraparound services such as mental health supports, dental services, and assistance with shelter and nutrition. And one point I'd like to add, generally the cost to districts is just in the hiring of a school community coordinator. They did a case study in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the cost was $148,000. They found out that that community school coordinator leveraged over $1.2 million in services through grants and donations from local businesses and health systems. It's actually an ROI, a return on investment, of 7 to 1. As we're talking about limited resources here, that is really a very effective use of resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry Jordan.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers and the more than 13,000 members we represent, I am pleased to be here today to offer insight into the urgency of rectifying the decades-long disinvestment that has left our young people, a majority of whom are black and brown and experiencing poverty, shortchanged far too long. I'll begin with one recent example. Last week's heat wave that prompted early dismissals in over 1/3 of district schools. But the dismissals are actually emblematic of a much larger crisis, and that is the ongoing refusal by our Commonwealth and our country to provide black and brown children the resources they need to thrive. And it manifests itself in countless ways each day, including learning in buildings where the electrical systems could not even handle air conditioning units, even if they were provided. We expect staff and students to work and learn in buildings that would never be tolerated in a wealthier, whiter school district. And this is an egregious example of how our societal failures have perpetrated ongoing stress and trauma. I have a detailed and lengthy written testimony that I urge you to read along with the accompanying research. I am a teacher after all, and so I did provide a bit of homework. In your packet, you'll find a summary of an Albert Shanker Institute study regarding segregation and school funding. I want to highlight one quote. Breaking the cycle of segregation and K-12 funding inequality will require deliberate, large-scale interventions on both the housing and school finance sides of the equation. But the first steps are to acknowledge that racial, ethnic segregation and unequal education opportunities are inextricably connected, and to understand the history of how that came to be. That is the solution: investing in our young people and a deliberate, dedicated commitment to breaking down systems of oppression that have led us to this moment we are in today. In an article on reimagining school safety, authors Heather Reynolds and Ron Avi Astor note, recent data show that 14 million students in the United States attend schools with police, but no counselor, nurse, psychologist, or social worker. That should be deeply disturbing to all of us. A real commitment to upending these systems means investing in human capital, additional school counselors, additional nurses, additional support staff, and it means lowering class size and increasing pay. I also want to address the crises of gun violence and the devastating impact it has on our young people, many of whom have expressed the profound stress and trauma of loss. Last school year alone, 33 of Philadelphia's public school students were killed, and 199 were shot. And once again, this crisis is inextricably linked to systems of disinvestment and oppression. In her 2022 Center for American Progress article, Marissa Edmond illustrates that gun violence has a disproportionate impact on racial and ethnic minorities and is highly concentrated in a relatively small number of neighborhoods that have historically been under-resourced and racially segregated. I reiterate, there are solutions, and the solutions are resource dependent. Every lawmaker in our Commonwealth owes it to our children to once and for all address the disinvestment that caused then fourth grader Chelsea Mongo to write to Senator Hughes and tell him that her school felt like a junkyard. Shame on anyone who sees Chelsea's pleas and those of students before and after her, and refuses to act with the urgency this crisis demands. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Ashley Cocca?
Good afternoon. My name is Ashley Cocca, and I'm the school counselor at Beige Martin Elementary School. On January 4th, 2022, I attended a district professional development session where the Network of Neighbors presented. If you don't know what the network is, you really should. The network comes alongside communities who've experienced school-wide and community-wide tragedy, trauma, and toxic stress. I sat there thinking, I am so glad this support exists, and I'm so very fortunate that our school community has never needed to call on them. The next morning was January 5th, 2022, the morning of the Fairmount fire. The morning that our school community, like so many, looked on in horror as we lost our students. 12 beautiful souls. It was terrifying. Trauma entered our bodies and brains. It was a time of intense devastation, and I didn't know how we would ever recover. My brain did what it had to do, and I responded in task mode, organizing the Red Cross, talking to our district supports, crafting messages to students, families, and the community. I understood my task. I had to take care of my community, my 500 students, and all of their families. Then the network of neighbors came, and they took care of me. My school counseling colleagues came, and they took care of my students, my staff, and me. It was a time of intense devastation, and the effects still linger. The truth is, the Fairmount fire is one example of the type of trauma that impacts our city. Sometimes trauma is a large-scale tragedy and the headline story on CNN. But most of the time, trauma is nuanced and subtle. It is the daily backdrop of Philadelphian life. It's generations of children regularly encountering gun violence, drug abuse, poverty, domestic violence, tragic loss, isolation, homelessness, abuse, child welfare systems that have very few solutions, crisis centers that are overrun and overstaffed, partial programs and mental health agencies with wait lists, inadequate collaboration, and inconsistent continuity of care. It's hearing, my dad died, my sister was shot, we got evicted again, I don't know where we're staying next. My stepdad jumped me last night. My mom lost her job. My mom let him back in the house, even after I told her what he did to me. I can't focus, I can't sit still. I'm angry and I don't know why. What's gonna happen next? Trauma is so constant that it becomes regarded as normal. Trauma is not normal. It literally changes the nervous system and the brain. Our students are physiologically in a constant state of trauma response. They are attuned to surviving, not thriving. Hypervigilance looks like inattentiveness. Anxiety looks like hyperactivity. Depression looks like truancy. We mistake survival skills for learning and behavioral deficiencies. Trauma changes everything. Despite this, the children of Philadelphia persevere, but not without consequence. Some keep moving forward, but a lot can't and a lot don't. Make no mistake, their perseverance is admirable and inspiring, but the resilience of a child should not be necessary, and it certainly shouldn't be considered enough. All children in all zip codes have the right to access and engage in high-quality care. Currently, that is not how systems operate. Our children need more school counselors to know students, their stories, and their needs, to coach families through the maze of health systems, ensuring best possible outcomes for students, to inform others about trauma response and trauma-informed practices and strategies, to normalize mental health, to destigmatize struggles, to advocate for healthy, thriving, and fair systems, to have enough time to run effective groups without being pulled into supplementary tasks. I don't see everything. I've been the only school counselor for over 500 students. There are traumas unknown and there are hurts unaddressed. When we are the only lifeline for student mental health, we are not providing safe spaces for students. Students need intentional, preventative, and responsive care, and we simply don't have enough school counselors. Our mental health partners and supports need clearer processes, more communication, and better continuity of care. Our children deserve it. Lastly, we need to acknowledge that staff are also traumatized. We are in toxic stress all of the time. Where do we go when we learn about these traumatic events? Where do we go with the fire that burns in us, with the tears that well behind our eyes, and with the emotional exhaustion that makes us question why we do this work? Staff need a safe place where we can process the vicarious trauma and tend to our toxic stress. A care team in every building, a network of neighbors team for every school. Staff need intentional, preventative, and responsive care, or we're going to keep losing educators. What do you think of when you hear the term the youth of Philadelphia? Until the first image you think of includes healthy, thriving children, I believe we will continue to be underfunded because our children will never be truly seen. We are not a throwaway city. If I-95 can burn down and be rebuilt within weeks, I have to believe there's funding out there to meet the needs of our children. We just need to be placed on the priority list. A city that's been burning in trauma can be rebuilt too. Thank you.
Thank you. Fatoumata Sidibe. I hope it's close.
Good job, Mr. Chairman. Not quite, but good.
It's Fatoumata Sidibe. Yes. Sidibe. Hi guys. Hi everyone. I'm Fatoumata Sidibe, and I just wanted to thank you guys for letting me speak and testify for the whole school district. I'm honored. It's surreal. So I'm a senior at William Bodine High School for International Affairs, and I've had a diverse upbringing when it comes to education. So I've been blessed to experience different schools with each its own culture, from a college prep charter, from a private Quaker school, from an Islamic education school, and this is my first public school. It's great, but it has more potential, and I can see the potential, but we all know why it's underfunded. And don't get me wrong, it's not because of our quaint and worn-down converted elementary school building that opened up in 1924 and will soon turn 100 years old. It's the people that contributed to its culture and that are helping bring it back to life. I love to learn, and I was excited to start 9th grade and experience a new atmosphere, but unfortunately, the pandemic took place, causing me and my new classmates to be retained behind little boxes and engaging over a screen. I'm a kinesthetic learner, and I cannot learn that way, so it was really tough on us. It's been a difficult adjustment, to say the least, going back into the school building, coming from the pandemic, and having to face the violence here in the city, too. It took a toll on us students as a whole, and our mental health, and I know a majority of us were unprepared for going back to school. My classmates and I usually leave the house before light just so we can make it to the train on time. And we have to move our seats because of the secondhand smoke we're exposed to. Then going down the terminal steps, and we have to dodge past people, blocking the walkway with needles in their arm, walking to a path of another pile of needles, and finally making it to class on time. We're required to engage, to be fully present, and to get good grades for our school district. But we can't, and none of us even want to show up just because of that. And I love to learn, so it says a lot. We're required to invest so much time with little effort given back to us with the support for our success. We don't even have a library or even a cafeteria, and that's 2 bare minimum things that kids need to get through the day. We shouldn't have to go through so much just to get an underfunded education. My school would definitely benefit from having a library with a librarian, a cafeteria, cleaner bathrooms, an adequate gym, and just overall, maybe even a better school, a bigger school. It's an elementary, and fundamental support.
Thank you. Questions from members? Representative Isaacson.
Bodine High School is not only in my district, it's up the block from my house. And it was a polling place, but we could no longer use it as such because it's not handicapped accessible because the elevators don't work. And no one had the money to fix it. So I am well aware. And you get off at Girard Avenue. Yeah, Girard Avenue right underneath the L, where we have the largest open air opioid crisis occurring daily, and the children have to walk past it. And she's a high schooler, and it's traumatizing. Can you imagine what it's like for the elementary students that also have to see that? So I'm well aware of that, and I'm sorry it can't be a better experience, but it's a good school.
It's a great school.
It is. My question, bless you, I remember the Fairmount fire, and it was traumatic to everybody, the loss of life and families, and the community school that your school is. Most people don't realize that a lot of the schools in the neighborhoods are the lifelines, and they bring the communities together. The lack of nurses, the lack of counselors, the trauma that's experienced, also by the teachers. I was happy to hear we have better teacher attendance, but one of the reasons we don't have the best teacher attendance is because they are as traumatized also as everyone else. How do we work that? I don't know who wants to take this one, but how do we start to work that into the matrix of how we're going to evaluate success if we're going to try and come up with something? You know, is it a reporting system through the counselors, the teachers, the principals? Just because all these things affect the level of learning that the children achieve. Anybody?
I will attempt to answer it. I certainly know that what I say will not be the total answer, but certainly probably just a small component. I do believe that we begin by making sure that buildings are staffed properly. And by properly, I mean appropriately, with a number of counselors, with a nurse in every school, because it's not the case in every school today. I think the counselor just testified that she has 500 children, which means 500 families that she deals with every day. It is beyond the recommended number that the National Counseling Association recommends for counselors. I think it's somewhere, and help me with that, about 250? Yes, that's what I was going to say, 250. So she's dealing with a double workload of families and children, and many of the children have special needs, and they require an enormous amount of time, and she's required to maintain a lot and to write a lot of paperwork in order to make sure that the children's IEPs are in order and other requirements that the state and the federal government put upon teachers and counselors, so it's very stressful. We had a child in Philadelphia schools about 10 years or so ago die because of the heat in the building. She was a child with asthma. She had an attack. She went home. Her dad took her to the hospital. She died. That was another very traumatic problem that we dealt with in this city. So there's an enormous amount of trauma that the children, the adults, and the families are dealing with. And if schools are staffed appropriately and that there are enough counselors and enough nurses and enough teachers and a librarian, as the student from Bodine just testified about, having the need for a library with a librarian, those things alleviate the amount of stress that people are under. And when there is something that happens that is traumatic, we're able to embrace each other and support each other. But when you're by yourself and you're dealing with a huge tragedy such as the one that the counselor just testified about, it is very traumatic and it is very hard to deal with.
Yeah, let me add on to that a little bit. First of all, as we know, we do not operate in a vacuum. So one thing that we need to do is make coming to work in our schools all over the Commonwealth in these positions more attractive. There's a recruiting war going on out there. So the facilities have to be safe, warm, inviting. Compensation must be competitive so that we can compete with everyone else to hire these people. And the preparation programs in the colleges need to be more robust and tailor their programs more to the needs of the schools, so that then that will translate into the proper number of personnel in the schools so we can deal with these serious issues.
I don't know how to evaluate all that, but what I can tell you is what I wanted to get across in my testimony is, do we look at school staff as traumatized? Do we know that they're traumatized at baseline? Are we trauma informed from the top down? So when we ask questions like, how do we evaluate that? We need to start with understanding where our staff is coming from at baseline. And that's just not an understood baseline anywhere. Where does staff have a place to voice? It's really hard to watch this Alice active shooter training by myself in an asynchronous PD when I'm imagining putting my first graders and throwing books at a shooter that comes in the door. What? Like, I'm doing this on my own? Where do I go to process this? Where do I go to talk about this? Where do I go to actually process this? It doesn't have to be the Fairmount fire. It doesn't have to be an active shooter. It could be the idea of an active shooter coming into your room, coming into your office. My children go to my school. I think about it every day. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't know the answer to evaluate this, but what I do know is staff isn't understood. Probably everywhere, because I don't know where the voices are. I don't know where the paths are for them to say, I don't even know if they know. This is toxic stress. This burnout is toxic stress. This burnout is trauma, because it's so normalized. It's just so normalized that this is what we do. We laugh at Abbott Elementary because of how it makes fun of schools in Philadelphia, because it's so true. Lights don't work, tiles are out, bathrooms are a mess, but that's actually not normal. That's actually not normal. But we all function like it is. And we can't evaluate normal in the abnormal. So I don't know the answer, but I know that's part of it.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be as cookie cutter as coming up with an evaluation system without taking into account the different experiences that everyone has around the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our testifiers today. I used to represent the Allentown School Board. I was a board member, and very similar demographics. 80% are at or below the poverty line, and 75% are minorities. One thing I did learn is that it's expensive to be poor, and one thing we see that with our parents going grocery shopping, they don't have the transportation to go to the grocery store, they go to the bodega, it's expensive. School districts Band-Aid on the buildings, it's more expensive because they don't have the funds. One thing I did notice is the perpetual cycle of teachers entry level entering the Allentown School District, staying for a couple years and then going to the richer suburb school districts. Any thoughts on how do we interject immediately in that to break that cycle? And I look to Arthur, I know you kind of mentioned that in talking pipeline, but any thoughts on how we break that cycle?
I think to begin with, teaching is, as we all know, very difficult. Getting through the first couple years is really the breaking point for where a lot of people stay or leave. Teaching in urban districts is even more difficult. One of the things that we need to improve is the preparation programs at the universities. They really have to work in conjunction with the districts to develop programs and professional development to prepare them to work in it. And then the districts must provide more support than they do now for new teachers. Most people do not go into this to get rich. And generally, a lot of the people that I've come across that come to work in urban districts come because they want to. And if they are supported and felt valued and see that they're making a difference and making some progress, they will stay.
Yeah, and we definitely saw, especially during COVID too, it's a burnout, and as those COVID dollars, we extinguish them by the end of next year, could definitely concern that we're going to see more of that. We don't have the support systems, and we didn't even before that. But so I agree. Thank you, Arthur. Mr. Jordan, did you have something?
Yes, I would like to add that there need to be better working conditions for teachers to remain in buildings. The problem that we have in large districts such as Philadelphia is that there are not enough resources. We have teachers who are spending about $1,000 out of their own pockets in order to buy materials for their classrooms. This is something that goes on every August, September, October. Just as was just stated, the counselor ratio is really substantially under what is recommended by the Professional Counselors Organization. And so the workload, the lack of personnel in order to support discipline in buildings and other services is why teachers leave districts that are underfunded and they go to other districts that are better funded because they're able to have better working conditions and have a say about what happens in their workplace.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hughes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fatih, you did a great job. You did a very good job. All right, give it up for Fatih, all right? I'm not going to tell him where you got your training from, Will. That's between you and me. I'm obligated to read this from Jim Schroeder. For 15 years of working in partnership with public schools in West Philadelphia, as a parent of 2 students enrolled in the Philadelphia School District and as a partner of a career teacher in the city, I've seen firsthand the possibilities when schools are provided adequate resources. However, I've tried to work in classrooms without air conditioning on 95-plus days, 95-degree-plus days. I've discussed with my second grader why he isn't comfortable using the bathroom at school. I'm going to say it again. I've discussed with my second grader why he isn't comfortable with using the bathroom at school, lack of cleanliness and privacy. I've worked with many excellent career educators who leave our classrooms for districts with higher pay, better training, and more instructional resources. As elected officials, I suggest respectfully that you visit not only the classrooms, but the bathrooms of each school your policies will impact. Come work from my children's building for a day. Come work in my children's building for a day. Art Steinberg, you indicated that, and I think correctly so, that folks don't enter the profession of teaching or all of the other positions inside a school building for the pay. They don't enter it for the pay. They enter it because of a passion, and that's my add to your comment. They enter because of a passion and wanting to make a difference. But the conditions, Jerry, the conditions, the environment, the issues that have to be confronted, we need, and I suggest, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, I suggest we need more information around what it is that would attract and retain individuals in our schools and those who work in the environment. We're working on a teacher pipeline, working on student-teacher stipends, all right, and that whole issue to try to provide some resources there. But the issue of what can we do, and if we get this funding that the Commonwealth Court has mandated us to do, how would you suggest these dollars be utilized to make sure that we deal with the personnel side of this conversation?
First of all, I would say that we have to eliminate the haves and the have-nots in a district. There are some schools that have more resources than other schools. And we need to level that out so that all schools have the same things and all children get the same opportunities regardless of where it is that they attend school. And, you know, we need to have lower class sizes. We need to have safe, clean, and healthy buildings for kids to attend and for staff to work in. We need to have the personnel, the nurses, the counselors, the school psychologists. You know, mental health is a real big issue that teachers and schools are dealing with every day. We've got to have those supports there for children, and just as was mentioned, some for staff as well. We need to have all the books and supplies. You know, you shouldn't have to use a 15 or 20-year-old textbook for a subject that you're teaching. I mean, you just shouldn't have to. And kids shouldn't have to share books. I mean, we have, you know, in too many cases, children not being able to take books home because there just aren't enough. So, I mean, that's just a short list of some of the things that will be needed in order to level that playing field so that, you know, with all due respect, I think that everything that Lower Merion School District has, Philadelphia schools should have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Phillips-Hill?
Thank you so much for your testimony today. Fati, congratulations. You are the first student to present to the Basic Education Funding Commission. Well done. I really want to go back to where Representative Isaacson was, because the previous panel testified that the state testing PSSAs, they're just really a snapshot in time, right? We know that kids can come to school and a whole host of different things could have happened, and that test result may not be the best snapshot of them. So we're looking at trauma, and so we don't want a one-day snapshot. We probably need to look at this over the course of time. So when we talk, and this commission has talked a lot about how we measure and how we provide accountability. So how do we quantify trauma levels to reflect a student, not just a snapshot in time, but really over a period of time?
I think, you know, a lot, it's based on, there are studies and research we can get to that show the different levels and types of trauma that kids and staff experience. And a lot of that is anecdotal. You can talk to this counselor here about what her kids go through.
I mean, clearly,
and I don't
her
believe,
testimony was very compelling.
and the research on the community schools has shown the impact that the services that they have then engaged have improved the stress levels for kids, lower levels of depression, lower levels of anxiety, increased achievement, less substance abuse, and just better overall well-rounded health.
Well, one of the things we're struggling across the Commonwealth in terms of workforce, right? It doesn't matter if I'm at the little corner pizza shop, I'm at the largest manufacturer back home in my district. We make a lot of snack food, right? Utz makes potato chips. They're struggling for their workforce as well. Everyone is challenged. Everywhere I go, now hiring, help wanted, job fair next week. One of the things that was included in the budget that was negotiated with the governor were funds for a program that would put I think it was entitled the PA Mental Health Learning Program in schools. They called it PA Helps. And it would be a state-funded program that would encourage students to complete internships in school-based mental health fields in Pennsylvania, obtain their employment and certifications in a local school district. I mean, this is something that it's almost there, but it's not quite over the finish line. Have you had the opportunity to look at that program, and is this the kind of thing that would help bring people into this profession?
Oh, I believe it would. I have only looked at it on a grand, macro sense. But anything that will bring more personnel into the schools, train them, get them in there while they are learning, then have them kind of feel an affinity toward the school they're at, is more likely to lead them to want to stay. You find that with student teachers a lot. They generally would like to come back to be employed in the school their student taught at. So that would absolutely help.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I want to continue on this line of questioning about trauma. As part of the Basic Ed Funding Commission 8 years ago, we put in our addendum that we hadn't dealt with the issue because we didn't know enough about it. I've been working on it ever since, and the more I learn about it, the more depressed I get. But the part that I do know is that there's 30 or 40 years worth of clinical research on this. This is not some new, fangled, hey, how do we, it's not the flavor of the day. It is well researched, it's understood. The adverse childhood experience, ACEs scores, we know that kids that experience more than 3 ACEs and don't have somebody that they can be resilient with or help them be resilient, that they're more likely to end up in jail, they're more likely to commit crime, they're more likely to have a marriage that ends in divorce, they're more likely to use drugs and alcohol, they're actually more likely to have heart disease and diabetes. Because when their brain gets coded for repeatedly, it does have a physiological change. I've often said, when you say, do you guys understand what PTSD is for a soldier? And most people go, yeah. And I go, do you understand what ACEs are for kids? And they go, well, I don't buy into that sort of psycho mumbo jumbo stuff. If you gave a soldier on the front line a door out the back and said, whenever things get a little too tough, just go out that back door. You can get off the front line. My guess is we wouldn't have much PTSD. If we say to kids that are 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, you don't have a back door either. You just live with that trauma. They end up with the results of adverse childhood experiences, and it is devastating for the rest of their lives. Those kids actually operate from the basal part of their brain, so when somebody says to them, it's reptilian. When somebody says to them, you look funny, they don't go, you look funny too. They punch the kid. And then that kid gets in trouble and sent to the principal's office and put in juvie, and the whole cycle starts. And if we can get to those kids early, so I've been for literally 7 or 8 years trying to figure out how we work that into a funding formula. Originally I was like, this is going to be easy. We just give every kid an ACEs test. And then I was told by the advocates, don't you dare, because you re-traumatize those kids every time they have to relive those experiences. It's like, okay, so how do I get to the numbers? Today I finally had an epiphany with this panel, because I've been trying to figure out how to get the appropriate level of funding to schools so that they can deal with the numbers of kids they have. And so one school might get one more counselor than another, and the epiphany I had today was, I just got to get you 1 per 250 to start with. I'll let the next panel 5 years from now get, instead of you 1 more associate, get you 2 or 3 more associates. But if I don't even get you 1 right now, I haven't done my job at all. And that I can quantify. That I can say, what is a national standard for how many counselors you need per kids? And damn it, we're going to put funding in there, and the school district has to hire those number of people. And that's a start. And so I'm going to commit to you today that I will fight tooth and nail to make sure that at least that gets to be part of the funding formula. And then within the next 5 years, I hope that my colleagues or my successors or whoever is on this panel 5 years from now says, and we're going to up that because we're going to figure out a way to count kids exactly and get you the kind of help you need. So
That's really great. I know, speaking for myself, I appreciate that. And your whole speech there was, you're preaching to the choir, and this is a great start on it, so thank you.
And I too want to thank you, Representative Sterla. As you were speaking, I was thinking about the comments that Senator Miller made a few minutes ago, and I think that I would, ask the committee to really, really think seriously about the effects of poverty and what it has on children who attend our schools, because they need more services and much more support, and schools need to make up for the deficiencies that some children start our schools with in kindergarten or first grade. They have been exposed to less than children in more affluent communities. And so I think that factoring poverty in and however you develop the formula, that is critically important. This morning's Enquirer here in Philadelphia had an article about Philadelphia still the poorest large city in the United States. We've dropped from 26% down to 21.7, I do believe, was the number in this morning's paper. And our kids who live in communities where there is a tremendous amount of violence. We had children who lost loved ones during the pandemic a couple years ago. They came to school with that loss, and they needed people to talk to and to help them understand what they were feeling, what their families were going through. And poverty affects so much in their lives, and unless we address that, we're not really doing the job that I think everyone wants to do.
thank you.
And just a reminder to some of the other folks in the audience, since we're here in Philadelphia, poverty is prevalent across the Commonwealth. Those are, a lot of people lose sight of the fact that, we have some of the poorest rural communities in the country. And so, please don't lose sight of that and recognize that as well.
Thanks. Yeah, my favorite quote was from Estelle Richardson, who used to be the Secretary of what was then Health and Welfare, and she said the average recipient of welfare in the state of Pennsylvania was a single woman. She was white, and she lived in rural Pennsylvania. And we have a tendency not to recognize that. So thank you. Our next panel is Donna Cooper, Executive Director of Children First, Joan Duval Flynn, Chairperson of the Trauma Informed Education Coalition, Mary Beth Hayes, Director of Philadelphia Healthy and Safe Schools, Temple University, and Dr. Shawn Ginwright, Founder and CEO of the Flourish Agenda. If you all will come up and stand, I will get you sworn in. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And if so, indicate by saying, I do. Thank you. We're going to begin with a familiar face, Donna Cooper.
It's very hard to follow that panel and the words from the teacher, the counselor. It's just stunning. But one of the things I do want to say is that 99.5%, maybe 99.9% of Philadelphians are not doing heroin, are not shooting guns, are not abusing their children. But we live in a community where that 0.1% or 0.5% is a lot of people, because this is a big city. And so it's hard to escape that. But given that you're not all from here, I really want you to understand that most of us are struggling because of the challenges that a small group of people face, and the schools are a key part of that solution. So I'm not going to read my testimony verbatim because I think you've heard enough about what's happening. I want to make the point that's in the testimony. But before that, let me pretend I'm a school teacher and ask you to take out a pen because I have a typo that's pretty material in the testimony. And that is on the first page where I reference that your predecessor commission came up with a really good school funding formula. And that is being used to drive out all new money and level up as well, right? And in my testimony, I have a typo because I typed too fast, and it says that 34% of the money's going out on the formula, but it's 23%. So if you'd be so kind as to correct that, and I apologize for my mistake. That would be it. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. I should have done the legislative way. And I do want to say that to the question of how do you measure for trauma and how do you measure to make sure you end up at the right place, whatever you choose as that measurement, I hope this commission will do what the legislature did in 2007, and that is to create adequacy targets for each district so that the situation can be solved district by district. Those adequacy targets were set in 2007 by a House with a strong Republican majority and a Senate with a strong Republican majority. Wide bipartisan support for both adequacy targets and a multi-year rollout plan. Now, the target we have to hit today is higher. Obviously, you'll look at whether you think Matt Kelly's research is right, but I think no matter how you pull it apart, you're not going to end up at a very different place. Having done 3 different costing out processes in 2006, it really all comes down to the same. So $6.2 billion seems like a reasonable start. Today, we're talking about trauma. And what I think is the core issue for this commission is to figure out how, with respect to school funding, you build in the resources to deal with the aftermath of social isolation, grief, and loss from the pandemic. Kids are still suffering from the pandemic, and kids are suffering across the state, not just in Philadelphia, from opioid abuse that's ravaged their communities, violence that's far too pervasive, and the impact of social media everywhere. And what I want to point out is that the scale of mental health challenges is skyrocketing. Now, maybe we're getting better at measuring it, to the point about measurement. But the Surgeon General's report found that in just the 10-year period from 2009 to 2019, the feeling of sadness or hopelessness among kids rose by 40%. The share of kids considering to attempt suicide grew by 36%, and 44% more kids put a plan together to kill themselves. And in 2020, 6,600 kids took their lives between the ages of 12 and 24, making suicide now the second most prevalent cause of death behind gun violence for children in America. So what's happening here? So we have some tools to look at that. We have the Pennsylvania Youth Survey. And so what I did is I said to myself, well, let me see what's happening, because your job is to deal with the lawsuit and the funding formula. Is there something different between kids in the high wealth communities and the low wealth communities? And what I was surprised to find is that wealth of the community, whether you take the top wealthiest 20 counties or the bottom lowest wealth counties, 41% of the kids are sad or depressed. Pretty high correlation with the federal numbers. 19% of kids reported intentionally harming themselves. Rich communities, poor communities. 16% planned their suicide, and 12% attempted to take their death. No material difference in the share. Okay, so kids are really pretty much the same. There's a high level of resiliency, clearly, in Philadelphia, if Philadelphia's numbers are pretty consistent with the rest of the state, given what you heard in the prior panels. But what I then looked at is, well, what resources are available to help those kids where they spend the majority of their active part of the day, and that's in schools. So I compared the top 20 highest spending districts in the state with the bottom 20% spending districts of those in the Level Up supplement. And what I found is that the highest wealth districts have 68% more funding to spend on student support services. 68. I round that up to like a much, it's a big number, 68. 38% more money is available to kids in those top 20 2020 school districts for school psychology services. 43% more for school health services. 72% more for school nurses, and 59% more for guidance counselors. So you can see there's a stark difference in the resources available to meet what we just heard about. Now, I want you to understand that in these communities of higher wealth, those families also have typically private health insurance, so they can meet, they might have some private coverage, although this is something Pennsylvania does need to tackle. Different hearing, why private health insurance doesn't meet mental health needs of kids, but we can testify about that on a different day. But the fact is, parents in those communities probably have money that they can spend out of pocket to help their kids. But the bottom 20% of the school districts, 77.5% of the kids in those districts are on Medicaid and CHIP. So there's very limited out-of-pocket availability in those families to meet the needs, and those kids are on waiting list by and large for mental health services because of the rates of reimbursements in Medicaid and CHIP that discourage providers from offering services in those systems. And so there's another telling difference between those districts, the top 20 wealthiest and the bottom 20. The lowest wealth school districts educate 6 times more kids than the top 20. They have 3 times the share of kids who are black, 7 times the share of kids who are Hispanic, and 32% of the students who are low income in the state. So these are the kids that, as I think it was Jerry Jordan said, poverty is a pretty good indicator of the availability of resources for these kids, even though they have the same level of trauma as their higher wealth counterparts. And I want you to understand that there was also something that I found in the comparison between these high wealth and low wealth districts. In the under-resourced schools, violent incidents were 40% higher. Out-of-school suspensions were 75% higher. And the violence-related out-of-school suspensions were 100% higher. I don't believe, and I hope you don't, that the kids in the low wealth districts are badder than the kids in the higher wealth districts. I don't think the kids in the lower wealth districts are more dysfunctional than their counterparts elsewhere. They just have less support. And I don't think that all kids with mental health challenges cause violence. No one would say that. But when a kid is feeling anxious, as the counselor said, anxiety is perceived as a problem in the classroom because you need to have a kid sit still and listen, and they can't do that. And we need to recognize that. So we asked kids what they thought we should do. And kids said to us, schools need mental health services on site with skilled professionals that know how to work with kids. Schools need to be places where mental health first aid is practiced by all adults and students. Schools can improve by teaching students mental health coping skills so they can learn. Teachers need to be trained on the basics of mental health and brain development so they can reinforce the positive coping skills. And we need counseling services that recognize that we have very diverse students racially and culturally. Before and after school programs where kids can be with caring adults, and that boosts their mental wellness. And that schools need to be trauma informed, as the counselor described, and trauma responsive places, because whether it's in a wealthy community or a poor community, our kids are suffering. Now, as part of talking to kids, we talked to kids also in Oregon, Washington, and Texas. And I have to tell you, it was so inspiring to hear these kids going to schools where mental health was front and center. And the administrators said they didn't have resource constraints in this. They had school-based mental health practices. Teachers were trained in school-based mental health procedures. And part of when I looked at it, I said, let me look what's happening in Oregon, Missouri, Washington, and Texas. Each of those states are spending more on education per student. State revenues, state dedicated taxes, higher in those states, resource challenges were far less. And the availability of resources was more equitable. And you're going to hear about the work of Shawn Ginwright, who is a national hero. We are so grateful you made this trip here. Today on healing-centered practices, and we are a partner with the school district in this work. And I want to tell you, this work is possible because of the COVID relief funds. Right, COVID relief funds, the worst pandemic in 100 years, making mental health services available in the poorest school district, one of the poorest school districts in our state. That's happening in Upper Darby too. Upper Darby is doing amazing work, classroom by classroom, school by school, improving mental health resources that are available. Again, pandemic money that will expire. And so it makes me want to ask myself, and I hope we will all, how telling and tragic is it that the capacity for two very low wealth, highly diverse districts to have the resources to give their students the mental health supports they need from federal relief funds from the worst pandemic in 100 years? How telling. So I just want to close by saying that this commission has to create adequacy targets. Those adequacy targets need to factor in whether it's a rural poor school district, a suburban poor school district like Norristown, or a urban school district like Philly, enough money to pay for the resources to deal with what children are walking into schools with. And we need that money now, needs to start to roll, because every day we're losing the hope of our students. When you do this, our schools will be able to deliver instruction and mental health services in a way that follows science, follow the need, and give our students the ability to, and the capacity to learn. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Joan Duval Flynn.
So to the members of the commission, to Representative Sturla and Senator Phillips-Hill chairs, we want to thank you from TIEC for this opportunity to speak to you today and to further submit the written testimony of the members of the Trauma-Informed Education Coalition. Our focus was to be the impact of trauma and mental health on school climate and school learning. So I am Joan Duval Flynn. I chair the Trauma-Informed Education Coalition, which is a diverse collaboration of lay membership and professionals from the fields of education, counseling, psychology, human development, and social work. And what we do is to plan and conduct professional development trainings for educators and all entities that work with and service children and their families. I want to start by associating myself with the testimony of the school counselor, Ashley Cocca, and Mr. Jordan and the student. My heart bled for her. You may recall Representative Sturla, and maybe you don't. Yeah, 2012, you hosted a trauma-informed presentation in Lancaster. And oh my God, Senator Hughes, what you have done for the children of this city and what you've done to move forward the work on trauma so that now you all are aware of it. I'm overwhelmed. This is a precious opportunity. We debated our 2 or 3 minute oral testimony, and our position was, you've heard it all, you listened to the court testimony. You're going across the state, you're going to hear it all over again. People are going to tell you what you need to make school districts provide adequacy. And I want you to think about adequacy as meaning enough to pay for a specific need. And so you're not going to be able to find a commonality. One district might need 10 teachers and another might need 4 counselors. So you're going to have to weigh through all of that. And I don't mean to stray from my testimony, but my soul was so moved by Ashley. So 8 years ago, working with the NAACP State Conference, we brought the issue of trauma to the first iteration of this commission. And since that time, much has been researched and written on the issue. And it is now commonly understood and it's accepted that trauma is pervasive among our young and that schools must have the resources to address it. But we have studied you all, and we know that you all individually in different ways are seeking to remedy some of the needs of children in this Commonwealth. We know that you have sent forward legislation dealing with all sorts of things, social media, the needs of the LGBTQ children. You are looking at how to do stipends for funding the training of counselors. You are looking at human trafficking, drug abuse. Many of you sitting here are working on this already, so we know you know what's going on in the real world and what you have to deal with. Today, I'm taken by the Commission's genuine desire now to understand the relationship between the performance of a traumatized student and how you set requirements. That is a complex, it's an unimaginable task that you're going to have to attend to, because trauma is a medical condition. And as a traumatized person, I might be in one place today and far worse tomorrow, or really bad the day I take the test, and then I get better. So you're going to have to deal with very delicate intellectual exercise when you seek to work that out. The court made a decision. We worked to get that decision for decades. And now, they have said that this present approach has no rational basis and does not serve the interest of the Commonwealth. No moral, ethical, logical, or mathematic explanation could make sense out of how schools were being funded. And so that sandcastle, as it was destined to be, has been washed away by the tides of justice. This commission has been given an immense responsibility and a significant moral charge. You have the privilege to create a new vision of education in Pennsylvania, a system more positive, more efficient, more just, to create a new mission for school funding. It is time for a new beginning. And you must start from scratch, and you must design a system that provides equal protection under law for each child in Pennsylvania. It is your charge to rebuild, to espouse an ethos concerning the young over whose lives you each hold virtually boundaryless power. You make the law. Boundaryless power you hold over the lives of these children. So the fundamental question before the committee, or the questions emerge. What are your collective attitudes and beliefs about the value of each child living in Pennsylvania? What is the worth of each child's potential? What is your collective philosophy on the purpose of education? I've been banging around enough that I know how the sausage is made. It's going to get messy. But these are the questions that you must hold before you with every decision that you make. I want to thank you for working on this task. This is an onerous task. You hold the lives and the future of children in your hands. Your work is going to change the history of Pennsylvania. Our recommendations are going to be, or have been submitted in writing to Mr. Dawes and the other gentleman. Listening today, I'm going back to our coalition and talk about these things. There are probably other thoughts we will seek to extend our testimony. We're at the service of the commission. We support your efforts in any way we can, and we're happy to address any questions you may have.
Thank you. Mary Beth Hayes.
Good afternoon, esteemed members of the committee. I just want to say, if I were in a trauma-sensitive classroom, well, if I were in a trauma-sensitive classroom, I'd stand up, because the contagion of the power in this room is palpable. So you may hear it in my speech, but trust, it comes with strength. So thank you for the opportunity. I would like to provide you with a comprehensive overview of the Philadelphia Healthy and Safe Schools, which to me, I believe is a part of the solution in this conversation. Phases has had a significant impact and has made on the well-being of our communities, especially our children. Phases is dedicated to trauma sensitivity and has been instrumental in enhancing school community wellness and safety while improving attendance and retention through trauma-sensitive approaches. If we delve a little bit deeper into the background and the purpose, the Philadelphia Healthy and Safe Schools Trauma Program is a response to the growing recognition and truth that trauma has a significant impact on students within educational settings. Research reveals that a substantial number of students have encountered various forms of trauma, which can hinder their academic success and overall well-being. The purpose of Phases is to develop a holistic and trauma-informed approach to address these challenges and provide students with the necessary support to thrive. The Phases Trauma Program is a comprehensive initiative aimed at transforming the educational environment into a safe and nurturing space for all students. By integrating trauma-informed practices, comprehensive student support, and active community engagement, the program seeks to create an educational ecosystem that promotes healing, resilience, and academic success. Our program prioritizes a collaborative approach that involves students, families, staff, and the broader community to collectively build a culture of understanding, empathy, and growth. There is an impact on wellness and safety. Research evaluations conducted within schools participating in the Phases program has now shown a tangible improvement in school climate and a sense of wellness among students and staff. The program's trauma-sensitive approaches have contributed to a safer and more nurturing environment, promoting overall well-being. Early data indicates that schools implementing Phases have experienced improved attendance rates, reduced behavioral issues, and a more positive perception of school life quality among both students and staff. These findings highlight the practical benefits of trauma sensitivity in educational settings. It's about building relationships. I come before you today, Phases in collaboration with Temple University's Lewis Katz School of Medicine Center for Urban Bioethics, which enriches the program with expertise, resources, and a commitment to effecting long-lasting change. This partnership has been instrumental in advancing trauma-informed practices in schools and communities. Research conducted in collaboration with Temple University has demonstrated the efficacy of trauma-sensitive strategies in improving student well-being and academic outcomes, and these findings emphasize the value of continued investment in programs like Phases. We establish core language that goes across school communities for staff, students, parents. Those that have undergone Phases training have reported feeling more equipped to handle students' emotional needs, resulting in improved classroom management, student engagement, and staff well-being. The impact on the specific schools in which we have already provided services, in the schools with marginalized communities like Mary McLeod Bethune Elementary, Kenderton School, and W.D. Kelly, Phases has made a significant impact on students and the broader community. Through its services and support, these schools have seen a reduction in the behavioral incidents and an increase in student attendance and engagement. And I say to you, it's on behalf of each of these principals that has allowed us within the School District of Philadelphia to come in and assess ourselves that we have been able to evaluate and come to these numbers. We empower parents and staff. The emphasis on staff well-being has contributed to reduced burnout rates and increased job satisfaction among educators. Research indicates that teacher satisfaction is correlated with improved student achievement and making these efforts integral to enhancing academic outcomes. The data supports the argument that trauma-informed practices are not a luxury, but a necessity. Teacher burnout is associated with reduced academic achievement and student motivation, which underscores the importance of investing in strategies that promote teacher well-being. And I have cited where these sources come from when I speak to you today. Studies have shown that attitudes related to trauma-informed care are positively correlated with compassion satisfaction and negatively correlated with compassion fatigue. Increasing awareness of trauma and trauma-informed strategies leads to decreased burnout and increased job satisfaction among all staff. So the call to action today is, I urge you, this committee, to consider the compelling evidence presented here, although preliminary, that the contribution of phases to our schools and communities is invaluable. Investing in trauma-informed practices is investing in the future of our communities, and the time to act is now. Let us unite in support of Philadelphia youth, champion this vision, and ensure that our children have the safe, nurturing, and empowering educational environments they deserve. And thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Dr. Ginwright.
Good afternoon, members of the Basic Education Funding Commission. My name is Dr. Shawn Ginwright, and I hold the Endowed Chair of Education at Harvard Graduate School of Education. I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Flourish Agenda, a national consulting firm that provides professional development and training to educators focused on both trauma and healing. Like many states in this country, the Commonwealth continues to struggle with a pervasive trauma exposure among students, particularly students of color. Traumatic experiences, whether due to violence or poverty or other adverse circumstances, can have a profound and lasting effect on a child's physical, emotional, and cognitive development. These experiences can hinder their ability to learn, form healthy relationships, and thrive in school. And might I add that you will not get academic achievement and performance without addressing issues of trauma, particularly in schools and neighborhoods where there's high levels of poverty and violence. Nationally, research suggests that 25% of America's children will experience at least one traumatic event by the age of 16. Black and Latino children and youth are more likely than any other group to experience some traumatic event. It is estimated that nearly half of all students in Pennsylvania have experienced at least one traumatic event by the time they reach adulthood. These traumas can range from witnessing domestic violence, living in a neighborhood plagued with violence and crime and shootings, and we know from research that there are significant consequences of this trauma on the lives of students and their parents. Research shows that students who have experienced trauma are more likely to struggle academically, exhibit behavioral problems, and have lower attendance rates, as we heard earlier. These challenges can lead to cycles of academic underachievement and can severely limit their potential. As a society, we have an urgent obligation to address the trauma that students face and provide them with the supports that they need to succeed. I want to add that I've heard a lot of conversation and discussion about trauma and not much about healing. And despite the fact that I know that you are looking for ways to appropriate funds to address trauma, I might add that you begin to reimagine and thinking about supporting and saturating young people's lives with healing. The approach that I've developed after working years and years and years with young people and their families in Oakland, California, and in San Francisco, and now in Boston. Healing-centered engagement is a promising approach that supports the well-being of the entire ecosystem that surrounds young people's lives. That is, investing in their well-being of their teachers, investing in the well-being of their parents, and investing in the well-being of young people themselves. Based on their unique cultural and ethnic identity, healing-centered strategies surround youth, their parents, and their teachers with tools that foster and promote healing and well-being. Investing in healing-centered practices and healing resources in our students is a critical and smart investment in the future of the Commonwealth. Here's a few reasons why it is crucial. Early healing-centered interventions can support and prevent these issues from escalating, can prevent post-traumatic stress disorder from escalating and improve the mental health outcomes of young people. By providing healing-centered supports, we can help these young people overcome barriers and achieve academically. Research has shown that there's a strong correlation between childhood trauma involvement and the criminal justice system. By addressing trauma early, we can help break the cycle of incarceration and reduce the burden on the juvenile justice system. In order to address these issues effectively, I urge the Basic Education Funding Commission to consider the following. First, expand access to participation in healing-centered strategies and programs. Just this summer, we piloted a program with the School District of Philadelphia called Camp Achille, where we supported and worked with 75 young people in healing-centered strategies. We are also in the process of training 150 teachers in healing-centered strategies in the School District of Philadelphia. Again, treating the ecosystem and not just the symptoms of exposure to trauma. This can be a model for the Commonwealth to lead the country in innovative and effective strategies, not just to respond and attack and address trauma, but to increase well-being and mental health access. Second, increase and expand funding for healing-centered training. Allocate funds for comprehensive healing-centered and trauma-informed training for educators, schools, and counselors, and support staff. And I might add that, as folks have already mentioned, the response and the solution to addressing trauma, we're not going to therapy our way out of it. That means the bandwidth of therapists and counselors, while important and necessary as a critical ingredient in addressing trauma, you need to democratize access to mental and behavioral health. That means that you have to saturate young people's lives with opportunities to be well and not just respond and treat trauma. This means thinking about peer-to-peer supports. How might we use young people themselves as a solution to providing mental health supports to themselves? For example, in California and other states are expanding and exploring how to expand access to Medicaid in order to increase healing opportunities that support young people. Young people are getting paid in some states to provide mental health supports to one another, peer-to-peer supports. And California is involved with changing who is eligible to provide mental health interventions and expanding access to Medicaid for community and peer-to-peer mental health interventions, a very innovative solution and response. Third, invest and provide funding for community partnerships. I've heard discussions of community schools earlier today. These foster partnerships between schools, community organizations, and mental health providers to create holistic systems of support for students, for teachers, and for their parents. The reason I keep on mentioning this trio is because we know that despite the fact that if we provide supports to students, their teachers also carry stress and trauma. And we know that if we provide supports, and I know your ecosystem is schools, which are students and teachers, but we also have to understand the role of parents that live in these same zip codes. To conclude, this Commonwealth has a unique opportunity to become the nation's first healing-centered state. Simply means coordinating funding streams and supports and opportunities for public systems to saturate young people with opportunities to heal and enjoy well-being, the type of well-being that most of us take for granted. But by prioritizing these strategies and investing in healing programs, we can forge new ground in supporting our students to reach their full potential and contribute positively to the Commonwealth's future. Thank you for your time, and I urge you to make this critical investment in the well-being of our students.
Thank you. Questions from members? Representative Williams, or excuse me, Senator Williams.
Thank you. So first a comment towards your panel and the previous panel, and then a question. To Senator Phillips-Hill's point, we absolutely have a staffing problem. That if we say 250 counselors per student, we can't staff that. There's a pipeline issue. I know you raised one bill that didn't get across the finish line, but myself and Senator Brooks got across the finish line last year in the school code, $10 million for a grant for school-based mental health professionals to provide paid training. Because in Pennsylvania, that pipeline is an issue because we are 49th or 50th in the country in terms of how we fund higher ed and the highest in student debt. And I've talked to school counselors who said the only reason that they were able to stay in the job they love, being a counselor or being a school-based therapist in the school, was because of the pause on student debt at the federal level. That's the only way they could afford to be in the school. With that ending, if we're not addressing our higher ed, we have a pipeline problem. And then for the retention, Ashley shared, we're all talking about the trauma on our students, and I'm glad the panel talked about the trauma on our educators. I've heard that so vividly lately. Myself, Rep. Topper, and Rep. Schweier were with a group of teachers, and we had a teacher stand up and say that one of her coworkers killed herself. And they had like an hour to get themselves together to tell all their students and go back to work. And she asked the question of, what do you do with 25 years of that trauma? And as the educator, so that's like the retention problem. And both the pipeline and the retention problems are caused by decades of disinvestment in higher ed and the K-12 space. So I'm happy that we are sitting here with a Commonwealth Court decision saying that we have to fix that, because this problem is not just one thing. It's lots of things that both cause the problem and are the solution to the problem. So that's my comment, and thank you all for your testimony, both on the last panel and this panel. My question, and this is to Ms. Cooper. We've heard reference already in these hearings about the pre-K seats being quote-unquote unfilled, and questions then about that state funding as a result. And we all know that pre-K is so important for school readiness and providing to make sure that kids are prepared. And there are thousands of parents with children currently on pre-K waiting lists. Can you help the commission understand the fuller picture of why these programs did not fill their pre-K seats?
Thank you. And I do want to say that, thank you for raising the pre-K issue. I was the founder of the Pre-K for PA campaign, so I'm assuming, Senator, that's why you asked me that. And I would want to say that one of the things you learn in early childhood education is there's 9 domains of learning, not just reading and writing and arithmetic, right? And so those 9 domains of learning are part of building healthy children. So when 100,000 kids in Pennsylvania can't get into pre-K, we got a problem, right? And that's basically where like 101,000 kids who are eligible and not in. And I was at the hearing in Allentown where Senator Phillips-Hill really bemoaned the fact that we had 2,800 seats empty last year, and boy, do I share that. That's outrageous, right? We have kids who need it, 101,000, and we have empty seats. And we have 38,000 parents on waiting lists for pre-K. But we don't have the staff. Same issue, right? Labor force issue. And we don't have the staff because at the end of the day, these days, working in pre-K means you get paid less than working at Wawa or Sheetz. Or think of it, working for Amazon, where you get better benefits. Not only better pay, but you get health care and you get tuition reimbursement. So we're losing out. And I think one of the questions is, on some level, you have to think of yourselves as the employer. You, the Senate and the House, are the employer. You got to compete for labor. And until we recognize that basically the labor market is an economic market, the more you pay, the more applicants you get. Could be for computer engineers, it could be for building engineers. But people make job decisions based on pay. Maybe you didn't, and certainly I didn't, but 99% of people are making their job decisions based on pay. And when you, as the legislature, see yourselves as the employer and say, well, I'm going to beat Wawa and Sheets in this, and I'm going to make it possible to hire pre-K teachers because I'm going to invest enough in the pre-K counts program, we're going to fill those seats. Those seats weren't empty because there aren't kids. And those seats weren't empty because there aren't programs. Those seats are empty because there's closed classrooms. I want to make also, what struck me about the senator's comments about the $28 million that's not spent last year. It was spent. Providers used that money to increase salaries to keep the staff they had. So the tens of thousands of children who did get pre-K last year, they were enabled to be there because of that largesse from the Commonwealth of having that total pre-K counts line item funded. Were it not funded, you would have had, or less funding, if that $28 million wasn't available, fewer kids would have been served. It's just economics. We're competing in a very tight labor market. Shrinking cohort of adults, higher pay. It's easy, supply and demand. The other thing about this is that, there were 30 counties where there was, significant under-enrollment. This is not an urban issue. It's not a, sort of growing county issue. It's all over the state. So the economic imperative that Senator Phillips-Hill faces is the same as Representative Topper faces. We have to compete in a tight labor market, and we've got to sort of realize that. And it'll affect competing for teachers, counselors, therapists, all the same. So, we can't change supply and demand. That's sort of a thing. We have to compete. I also want to say that I wanted to make sure this commission understands that in this school funding system that we have right now, there's about $643 million going out to school districts, 321 of them, who have less students now than the student count on which their formula is based. So the student formula is based on a 1992 student count. 321 school districts have lost 162,000 students since 1992, and they are still being paid for those kids. $643 million. That's the same dilemma as the $28 million, because those school districts have lost kids, they've lost tax base, they need the money they're getting from the Commonwealth because they are so small. They're inefficient, true, but in order for them to offer a quality education, they need the resources we give them. And so we should sort of think about what does it mean when an educational entity has fewer people and still more money. What is the dynamic there? What's the problem? It isn't that money's being thrown away, because kids in Forest Area School District and Austin Area School District, which have lost 50% of their kids since 1992, but thanks to the hold harmless, they offer amazing education. We shouldn't begrudge that of those declining enrollment school districts. We should be emulating what's available to the kids in those districts in the school districts that are growing and the school districts that don't have all the resources that they need. So we have a lot to learn as you dig into this about what are the drivers and what's happening. But I would just say that fundamentally, we wouldn't have empty seats, I think, and what providers tell us is if we had competitive pay for early childhood teachers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative Topper.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank all of it. Look, listen, I've been in the General Assembly now for 10 years, and here's what I know. Being the last panel of the day is never easy. A lot of empty chairs. I appreciate you guys hanging in there.
You're who counts.
But and you can always call me Jesse.
Sorry.
Cooper. That's fine. I didn't lose my first name when I got elected. That's a joke I always like to make with senators, but there's too many of them in the room right now, so I'll let that go. So you have not just been in this space. You've been in the government space, the state government space. So you know a little bit about what our struggles are in terms of coming up with a system. And at the end of the day, that is our role, is to figure out how to drive whatever the number is. We still have to figure out how to drive those dollars out and what structure to create to make sure that it's not just adequate this year, but it actually is something that 20 years down the road has the ability to be structurally sound. And one of the, I can already see one of the themes coming from this first week is what elements do we put into the formula and what elements do we keep the word that's been used all week has been buckets. What elements do we keep in other parts of the general fund? And I can see that there can be arguments made for both. One of the things that concerns me about putting everything into the formula, whether it be facilities, whether it be mental health, and we build it all into a formula, is that sometimes that takes away the ability to be dynamic if needs change and things happen in society that we need to look at, or if financial situations change in Harrisburg. So just with that in mind, and knowing that you've dealt with the budgets that we have dealt with over the years in your previous roles, do you have any thoughts on keeping certain things out of the formula, or is it time to look at creating a structure within the formula that houses all of these different issues, or some of them? What are your thoughts? Because I believe that is one of the issues that this commission will have to really take into account over the next couple months.
Well, I think that Joan, Duval, Flynn, and my fellow panelists and the earlier panelists pointed out that, really no two school districts are the same. And so the benefit of a big bucket is it enables school districts to meet their needs. And when you look at the states with the highest student performance, I always look at Maryland and Massachusetts, like I want to be them. They have the biggest bucket. They do the least amount of disaggregation of money so that school districts can think about what they're doing and make the decisions that they need. Now, we have to think about what's the accountability on that. I think a big bucket means more accountability.
And also, both Massachusetts and Maryland, if I'm mistaken, or not mistaken, also countywide systems?
Not Mass, but Maryland.
Maryland has
yes.
one. Okay.
Maryland, go countywide school system, yes. But Mass is like us. They have a lot of school districts. So I just think that, the question of disaggregation, the other thing is, why do we have a separate funding stream for facilities, right? Well, some of that is because when we started in the state, school districts were funded, in a reasonable way back in the 1900s, but the state grew. People moved west. People needed to build new facilities. I mean, if you look at the history of facilities funding, it's been in response to growth. And now what we have is a problem where facilities need to be in response to age. Mm-hmm. So we have a whole different dynamic that we have to think about what's going on where. But my view is that it is the easiest to administer and the easiest to have local decisions where school boards are making good decisions with their money and state money, where it's a bucket that is maintained. But I think what's important in that big bucket is it has to stimulate sufficient local tax effort. I mean, you can't pony up and not envision that the local taxpayers do the same. And so in 2007, when the formula was rolled out at that point, you got more in the formula, and same in 15, to the degree that you maintained a reasonable local tax effort. And I think the best control on good decisions is state local, because then those taxpayers and the school boards are going to be conservative, and they're going to use your money and their money in the best way possible. That's my view.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that perspective, because I think that, again, that is what we have to determine. What will the formula be used for? Will it be used to incorporate everything that we're talking about, from trauma, mental health services within the school to facilities, to the actual, what we determine as the baseline for classroom education, all of those things, and I think that will then eventually determine what we want to create in terms of a structure.
Well, I mentioned those 3 states where they have sufficiently, they have more state funding for schools. They have, and the schools don't have a special line item for mental health. It comes in through their regular school aid, Texas, Oregon, and Washington. We also talk to other states where there are line items for mental health. There's less dissemination for those services in that kind of system, because with more resources, if the state is providing the technical assistance, the learning on healing-centered engagement or phases or the research, if the state's enabling that, school districts can, if they have enough money, will deploy their resources to meet their student needs.
And then maybe in the meantime, then we can get rid of some of our line items in the budget as well.
Absolutely.
And that might make it a little bit more predictable for us. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Schweier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple quick comments and then a question. I promise I'll be quick on my comments. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for elevating this conversation. All of us have a guy in the neighborhood, right? You don't get into elected office without knowing somebody, whether it's from a particular neighborhood, a part of your district, whatever. One of my guys is somebody who spent a lifetime, early part of his life as an active member of a gang, incarcerated multiple times, has come out as reformed, and now helps people like me understand more and more what's happening in our community. He was one who told me that we should stop looking at detention as a punishment. We should start looking at detention in our schools as a way for kids in a bad situation to get an extra hour in a school that's safe, and I compared to what they're experiencing at home. It's a perspective of a guy, not necessarily founded in any sort of academic research, but just somebody from the neighborhood who understands the kids, and many of the kids better than I do. The second thing I wanted to point out, so elevating the conversation about trauma-informed education changes the way that all of us look at education. It changes the way that our teachers, but also our parents, are looking at, maybe the kid that's sitting next to my daughter, maybe there's something else going on, and we should look at things a little bit differently with that student. I really appreciate, Ms. Duval, Flynn, you're tying it to student performance. You all did, but you started the conversation of tying it to student performance. We had a homicide in Allentown last year. A 15-year-old student was killed, went to the same high school, was in the same class as my then 15-year-old daughter. And even though they weren't in the same class, they went to different elementary schools and middle schools. It impacted the entire school at such a profound rate. Such a profound manner that my daughter, who was in different classes than him, didn't know Shawn, suffered from the whole school suffering. It impacted our school's ability to educate every bit as much as it did shutting down the buildings last week because it was too hot. And so tying the trauma-based, the trauma-informed education to student performance is extraordinarily important to all of us. We want to make sure that if we're investing $6.2 billion in trying to achieve adequacy and equity, that we're doing so in a way that is going to generate student outcomes that we're all hoping for. And so on that point, I too, along with Senator Williams and others, am worried about a workforce issue in mental health, just generally speaking, but for this. We are all, frankly, people come to each and every one of us on a regular basis and ask us to buy their product. Hey, can you help your school district acquire this thing that's going to improve, yada, yada, yada. So my question to you is, how do we give is it wise for us to give school districts the opportunity to figure out what works for them? And how are we able to, frankly, help screen out those programs that, I'm not going to, cast any aspersions, but maybe don't work as well, while we at the same time as a Commonwealth look to improve the overall number of people in the workforce, so that as we transition to more school-based counselors and those sorts of things, we can find the programs, the community partners, for-profit, nonprofit, et cetera, that actually do what they say they're going to do, so we're not wasting our money, and more importantly, we're not wasting our kids and our families' times.
I would have just a couple thoughts for you. Longitudinal studies is how you figure out what works. We look a lot at Dr. Comer's work out of Yale, because it's been around 20-some years and always works. So you just have to lean on the research and the outcomes that have been produced from my point of view. But I want to be very sure that you are understanding that schools are not manufacturing lines. We do not produce standard products. We develop human potential. Human potential develops at its own pace. So you cannot evaluate a kid at 17 and predict. Einstein failed math. Human beings are unique creatures. You plant seeds, and then one day when there's enough sunlight and water, it germinates. It might not be in 3rd grade. So you have to be real about that. I had a student at Cheney that just was not functioning and wouldn't buy textbooks, wouldn't come to class. you know, wouldn't function. I was on the campus a few years later, and he ran up to my car window and said, Dr. Flynn, I want you to know I finished. He said, it took me a while, but I got what you were saying to me. And that's what teaching's like. Teaching is a spiritual exchange. If you touch the child's spirit, it will flourish. And if you're not in the community of educators that knows and understands that, it's really hard to get it. I can do a lot of stuff. I've taught from preschool through graduate school. I can do a lot of stuff and never see the seed germinate. So if you set arbitrary numbers, a student ought to score X on the English exam. That has nothing to do with that human being. It's arbitrary. Nobody can tell you how much you should glean from literature. You know yourselves because you're learned people. You read, you ruminate, it rolls around, and then one day you say, that's what that means. You know, I meditated, this is personal and then I'll hush. I meditated for years on a passage from my spiritual tradition that says, I am the vine. You are, what are these sprouts that come out? And I am the vine. And I thought about that and thought about that until I had a grapevine. And I saw the vine, where all of life comes up through it out of the earth. And then it, you know, goes out in tentacles. And that's how teaching is. Every teacher that makes a human connection with a child plants some sort of immeasurable seed. Now, it can take a long time. You can measure math. You can say, okay, we want them to be able to add, subtract, multiply, divide, do algebra, some geometry. And we want them, based on the concepts within that system of mathematics, to be able to demonstrate that they understand those concepts. You can measure that. But you can't measure a whole person on a mandatory test. You just can't do it. Now, well, let's put it two ways. Yes, you can do it because it has been done and the kids falling apart. But it is not viable. That's what I mean. So I know you have to come up with something, but I hope you find out something that works this time.
You know, one of the things that happens in the early childhood world at PDE, and this happens at the U.S. Department of Ed as well, is they have What Works Clearinghouse in the U.S. Department of Ed, and then at PDE in Oakdale, there's a sort of a, based on what you said, Dr. Flynn, you know, based on the research, what are the efficacious models? And then they are the models that, for instance, in pre-K counts, can be used for curricula. Now, somebody can call up Oakdale and say, I have a better curricula, and I want to test it, and there's all sorts of waiver options, and I think there's like 9 different ones. But you could, as through the State Board of Ed, identify processes that would offer you some quality control. And you have standards. You're not picking a vendor, you're picking an approach. So you can create standards. And I think you're absolutely right, because there are a lot of vendors. And so the question is, you know, what is the, you know, as Dr. Ginwright said, we're not talking about necessarily only approaches that require counselors and therapists, but in terms of saturating kids with opportunity, what do your school enrichment programs look like? What does your teacher training on brain science look like? You as the Commonwealth can create standards that describe those things, set parameters on that then make it harder for the vendors who are not meeting those standards to offer that. You see that right now in 3rd grade literacy, right? There's 1 million people out there right now telling everybody they're going to teach every kid to read by 3rd grade, right? Fortunately, you have educators who know the difference between something that's good and something that's bad. in this world, in the trauma-informed or healing-centered world, this is new. So we're going to need some help on that. We're going to need to think about that collectively.
Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon.
If I could, I appreciate your need for discretion in ensuring that there is an ethical investment of sorts. And where I sit in the Center for Urban Bioethics, I agreed to take this position for no less than 10 years, in part because that's respect for change. The other piece is that I have stated repeatedly, probably in my last staff meeting last week, if we're not creating impact, we need to get up. And the reality is we have a menu of services, we have a theory of practice, we have the ability to go in and create what would be likely understood as universal precautions of humanity. And so how do you ensure that the right people are doing the right thing? And graciously, phases is being evaluated, and it is working in our favor, and we are creating impact. And safety is our foundation. And so my hope would be to continue this conversation and extend the conversation around what's working and be mindful about that and how it can look so very different, because the trauma-sensitive conversation is building by building. And what I think we're learning from the wellness, the healing-centered approach is that there are some root fundamentals of what we're considering our core language. And so I will share that with you if you are interested, in hopes that it will drive you to make the kinds of decisions to continue to fund programs such as this. I agreed to 10 years, and I'm fairly certain our funding runs out by the end of this year. So whatever you could do expeditiously to assist, I believe, and I believe, and I know that we're doing the right thing because we're being evaluated. And so that integrity that we are bringing to our service goes beyond just knowing or having a hunch. So I thank you for the question and the opportunity.
And I would just add, and this comment is not saying that you should be venture capitalist with public dollars, but I would also caution to also over-rely on evidence-based practices. While that's one approach that matters because there's a track record and evidence, if you are locked into that, the complexity and the nuance of trauma oftentimes requires a scalpel instead of a knife. And so how might you think of these public dollars, a part of those public dollars being around innovation, looking at community organizations, looking at examples like in California where they're paying mothers, they're paying grandmamas to go into schools to de-escalate young men and women. So it's also, evidence is important, but also how do you think about using public dollars for innovation?
Thank you. Senator Hughes.
So the last panel is probably the most impactful panel, all right? And y'all are the last panel, and y'all have been the most impactful panel. I can assure you of that just looking at my colleagues. Dr. Flynn, we've sort of, of all the things we digest, through this process, one of the things, kind of a little lighthearted, but who comes up with the best line, all right, during the hearing? So we got 10 hearings, and we're looking for, the best line. I think the one yesterday, Attorney McInerney said, and then Oprah walked into the bar.
Yeah.
Okay. You have to watch the hearings to get the full context, all right? But this one was teaching is a spiritual exchange. Thank you. And I took your picture, and I'm going to post it, okay? All right, on social media. Jessica, you don't have that responsibility. I took care of that one. Somehow it always gets in the conversation, all right? I'll talk to Mrs. Hughes about that. So from having the work for years of dealing with breaking down the stigma, which through Breaking the Silence, which is what we've done for 20 some odd years, to now folks are very tuned into getting help. They're very tuned into getting help. we need you to help educate the nuances, the scalpel, not the sledgehammer, right? Not the knife. The work that you're doing with respect to getting phases and having it looked at. We educate us more about how that's happening and how that's working and the successes you are having, okay? Because Senator Williams and all of us will tell you, we got a pipeline issue that is a very serious problem. I think it's 2026, the cliff, the higher ed cliff hits us when nobody's going in and we're running out of kids. So we have to figure out new ways to help get this help out. But we have to train folks in whatever way it may be of how to do it, all right? Because somewhat of the competition is, should there be new spending coming into this space in education in general, there's going to be some charlatans out here who are going to want to sell this, and that, not because they give a damn, but because they see some money out there that they can try to make, okay? I'm obviously not putting y'all in that category, but the ability to substantiate that this is having an impact will be important because it is new, right? It is new. And so to the extent that you can think about it, and we will test our folks and our staff and what have you to try to bring more information to us as this process evolves, we'll do that. Just help us, because it's very important. We're battling this, and Senator Phillips-Hill and I have a bill around the impact of social media and what's really happening there, and unformed brains having access, young brains, young minds having access to this, and just driving all kinds of stuff. That's a whole nother thing we got to figure this out, and it has to be added into this, because 10 years ago, Donna Cooper, when we were doing this, there was no this, right? Right? There was no all of this. So I'm sorry, but you touched the most important panel, has had the most impact for me, all right? And I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough for this, what you're doing. Thank you, all of you. Thank you. And I'll talk to Mrs. Hughes about the teaching is a spiritual exchange and see what she says.
Thank you. Senator Phillips-Hill?
Well, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate all of your testimony today. You are right, Senator Hughes. That was probably the best. That's the greatest hits of a Basic Education Funding Commission. We're creating that album, but you know, I appreciate the accountability, the need for innovation, and also the need for accountability, because we recognize that people work hard for their tax dollars, and we want to put them into programs that produce tangible results, that make a difference in people's lives. And we can't afford to squander any of those taxpayer dollars. So, Dr. Ginwright, when Ms. Cooper provided her testimony, she talked about data that she said was equally troubling and especially confounding, and it had to do with the amount of social and emotional issues, students being sad, students being depressed, and the challenge with students who are privately insured and the ability of their families to access mental health services. But for those students who are low income, those individuals who are insured by Medicaid, we call it medical assistance here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, or CHIP, that they can have difficulty accessing behavioral health services. And so now we are at this point of asking our schools to do more. And they do more because they care about kids, right? But in your testimony, you talked about California and other states who are giving students opportunity for this increased healing from mental health challenges through Medicaid. And so when I try to figure out what's going on here, what is different about the way Medicaid or medical assistance operates in California versus the way it operates here? I'd like to have your opinion because I have some thoughts, but I want to see if I'm on the right track.
So first, I don't know specifically how it operates here. But there's changes in California legislation that is redefining who could provide care. I think Donna will be talking to the architect of that legislation next month. It has a different classification of who can provide care called peer-to-peer. And so this is also a workforce issue by actually training young people and young adults. See, young people are already, even though young people experience trauma, they already seek healing. They just can't get to the people that we believe that can heal them. And so therapy and counselors are oftentimes the most difficult to get to, but they could talk to their barber, they could talk to the beauty salon person, they can talk to grandmama, they could talk to people in their neighborhood. So all this is democratizing access to behavioral and mental health. It's saying that it already exists in neighborhoods that have trauma. Why don't we pay the people who are already doing it to have that access? And so the take-home message here is that I understand and I hear the workforce issue, and that's a real issue. We need more therapists, we need more counselors, and we actually need more culturally competent therapists and counselors, right? But also, this issue is so wide that if we only use this small lane to address this huge issue, then we're missing the point. I think we have to, it's just suggesting that we have to broaden our understanding. When I use the term saturate young people, not just treat them, it means that we have to open up who can actually provide that saturation. That's peers, that's parents, that's barbershops, that's coaches, that's anyone in the ecosystem of a young person's life that can have a conversation about their well-being and mental health.
It's really interesting. I mean, here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we really silo things. You know, we silo mental health and behavioral health from physical health, and we don't really integrate those things on the healthcare side. And I think at times that provides us with great challenges. So I appreciate getting your insight. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Phillips-Hill, so the architect of the California change, because I would say that even as today, California would rank the lowest in the country for youth access to mental health, because the law just changed. And they will soon catapult past all the other states because of the change they just did. But the gentleman who really developed that will be in Pennsylvania on October 12th and 13th. And I will make sure that you or your staffs are here, because at the end of the day, your issue about silo is core to this. We should not be building the basic education funding formula alone to solve school-based mental health issues. Medicaid and CHIP and private insurance need to be part and parcel of this, and they need to carry their piece of it. And we have a lot of innovation we can do in those three spaces, so that the burden on schools is, how do we train teachers to understand trauma and understand brain science? How do we train counselors, and how do we have enough counselors? But the fact remains that the mental health system itself here, because of the need to improve how we manage Medicaid and CHIP and also regulate private insurance, is a huge piece of the solution here on youth mental health issues. So I applaud you for pointing that out, if I might.
And I appreciate that. Look, I served as a school board director and always tried to understand what our core mission was. And I think we have continued to ask school districts to do so much, maybe more than they were, you know, than
they should be asked to do, but they step up and they do so much to fill vacuums. But I think siloing services and requiring schools to step into a gap because other entities that should be there aren't, just increases the costs of providing that education to children. And that's part of the problem that I think has gotten us here today. So with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ginwright, you talked about providing extra programs, and I know Ms. Hayes talked about, hey, look, we have a successful program, you have to fund it. If I don't have funds, I can't have a successful program. But most of what you do, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Hayes, you identify those things that are going on. You teach what's going on in a school, so you try and make sure that happens. And I had visited a school up in the Lehigh Valley a couple years ago, and they said they had done trauma-informed training with the entire staff, all the way from the janitors to the lunch ladies to the principal and every teacher. And what they were able to accomplish was that the prior year they had over 1,400 referrals to the principal's office, and after everybody went through the training, they had less than 400 referrals to the principal's office the next year, because people understood why a kid was acting out and what was happening, and gave the kid the opportunity to calm down and explain why they were acting out and those kinds of things. But to Dr. Ginwright's point, what I've learned anyway, at least I think I know about trauma, is that there's always the person that says, well, what about so-and-so? They had all that trauma inflicted on them when they were young, and look, they've turned out to be successful. And every story I've ever heard about that person who turned out to be successful says, yes, but there was a teacher or an aunt or a coach, somebody in my life that basically stepped in and gave me that door so that I could escape the front line. If that doesn't, we can't, those programs that you're running in a school can't always do all of that. If we have supplemental programs that then say, okay, we identified the kid, we just can't get to the family, we can't do that. And I think that's what you're talking about, Dr. Ginwright. How do we make sure that follow-through gets done? Because otherwise all I've done is identify that I got a kid that's in trouble, and I'm going to wait for the answer. And I will also, you set off an alarm in my head when you said about the grandmothers, because I recently had an opportunity to sit down one-on-one with Van Jones for half an hour, and he's got a whole lot of things he's doing with criminal justice and things like that. And his famous little story, he says, you got a 17-year-old and they do something wrong and they get put in jail. And we put him in jail for a year, and we spend $100,000 on him, and we make him a better criminal. He said, you give me $100,000 and a black grandma, I guarantee you I will get you a better result. And, it is so true, and I think what you're talking about is saying, like, let's find the other alternative to get a good result and make sure that kid gets help, instead of, oh yeah, now you have a record. So can you elaborate on that a little bit, or three?
Yeah, it's the fact that the issue of, and I think we should stop thinking about trauma and mental health as having an impact on that kid, but not that kid. We need to be thinking about exposure to trauma through zip codes or census blocks. And those census blocks need to be funded, or the zip code needs to be funded, not the individual school, because just like the fire that happened at the school affected the whole school, or something you said happened at your child's school, it affected the whole school even though they didn't know them, it's a collective experience of it. So that means that you have to expand the possibility of access, and by funding only this one train of access through therapists, it's important. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. We need more therapists, but that bandwidth, the way that we're thinking about the professionalization of access to mental health and behavioral health, it's so thin and frail. And we know from research that young people are seeking mental and behavioral health and healing strategies anyway. They do it when they talk to their peers. They do it when they go to the barbershop. This happens. They talk about their issues. And so what's being left at the table are the assets that are already existing in communities that are not connected to funding sources, right? And so if we could begin to use, the organizations that are already doing it, and we need to continue to fund those organizations, but there's also organic healing that's occurring in neighborhoods and in churches and on basketball courts with coaches. And if there can be some ways to think about pipelines or access, just like Cure Violence, we knew that we could not address and reduce crime only by hiring more police officers. Police officers are an important ingredient in reducing crime. But when we are able to hire credible messengers that can go into the neighborhoods and have conversations with other young brothers and sisters, that can actually de-escalate. It's the same practice and principle, is that you have to broaden and understand that this one institution is not equipped to handle the scope and depth of the complexity of the problem that's in their city.
If I may, full disclosure, I am a therapist. But nonetheless, thank you for bringing up Cure Violence. In the city of Philadelphia, Cure Violence sits in the same Center for Urban Bioethics, as well as phases, as well as numerous programs that came out of focus groups that create that ecosystem and look at merit-based relationships in healing. And oftentimes in my practice, but also through phases, we are looking at children as symptom bearers. And they are the pressure valves for the larger symptoms. And so when we think about the family, and as a contextual family therapist, we think about where do we look for the constructive entitlement? Where do we look for the trustworthy resources? And so none of these decisions can be made in a blanket way. We have to have the credible messengers handing over with warm handoffs the next credible messenger. And so I would love to have this conversation and continue on how do you do that? Who do we listen to, and how do we employ to the greatest health of recovery and healing, so much so that it is about wellness and there is so much less focus on the recovery. So I couldn't agree more. And Cure Violence is a model also that has been researched, and it's why in the center we move the same way, because we know the benefit of trustworthy relationships and upholding integrity in the human experience, because that is what allows for this to move and grow and heal. So I wasn't going to mention it, but thank you for mentioning Cure Violence. I respect everyone on that team as they are my colleagues. And again, our science says the same thing. If we are trustworthy adults and we bring to the table the kind of equity and the knowledge that we also learn from and can employ. So thank you all for this conversation.
Representative Sterler, if you would let me just share something with you, because I know that you ruminate on these things. The Harvard Center of the Child studies resilience. Resilience is just what we're talking about here. And so for so many years in the Black community, when there was no mental health support, we had our grandmother, our neighbor, our aunt, the barber. What has been learned about resilience is it only takes one. And that's what's being described here. I know we study and we formulate language and we create pictures around simple, basic concepts. One of the physicians that did the Kaiser Permanente study, culling through all the results from the ACEs survey, went off to the mountains of Tibet and every place else. He read every major religion according to a speech he gave. And he came down to one simple question: what are human beings for? And we were in a gathering of psychologists and psychiatrists and social workers, and, child support people, and there was a silence. People are to be loved and to love. That's what people are for. So when they don't get that, then they do these aberrant things, you know. I wanted to tell, let's see, Representative, I have trouble with your name. Schweier. Okay. about detention. Because as a middle school teacher, you know, I had my time when I had to do detention. It was in a closet, no windows. Children weren't allowed to talk. You know, there was no academic benefit. But then I learned about a thing called youth courts. And some of you may know about youth courts, where if a child infracts in the community, in the school community, there are children who've been trained to hold court. And if the perpetrator, hate to use these legal terms for kids, if the child misbehaved, is willing, he goes to youth court, where these children are learning civic responsibility. They are learning how to do peer support. Their goal is to restore the child to the community and mend the relationship that was broken when the child did whatever he did. They are so powerful, and I did in our written testimony send you all videos of children talking about the power of youth courts. And Upper Darby, which one of you is very familiar with, okay? They have youth courts all over the place. So I hope you'll even consider, when you think about how children who act out and infract against their community, think about restoring them as opposed to punishing them. They're children. You raise children, as the old folk in my life said, you raise children, you know, and you have to do that by loving them and teaching them and putting the circles around them of the community. Thank you.
Thanks. So, final question. Hey, yeah, no, I swear it is. I swear it is. So we haven't put funding in any formula yet for trauma, and we're talking about it, and we're trying to say, okay, we can show you that we can get you results, and we can do those kind of things. We've had past experience where we didn't have proof that we could do something, and we put money into it, and we did get results. And I think I'm going to go to Donna Cooper on this one. In the past, when we have put money into programs and said, we're going to expect you to get some results, I mean, what, can we show that we can actually get results if we say we're going to put money in and we're going to demand results, and can we get results? Or are we always just throwing money into the black hole and the abyss and saying, you know, hey, we hope we get something?
Well, are we talking about all of government or education? I'll just
Well,
comment. I'll just comment on
education in particular,
Right,
because
right.
we aren't going to go to the, yeah. Right,
But
yeah.
I would
I
say
said
that-
one question, not 50. you know.
Yeah, when Dr. Ginwright, when all these panelists have been talking about, you know, the grandmothers and the coaches and the aunts, I just want to say for the record that people are assuming these folks get some training. It's not just a random paying your grandmother. I just want to put that out there. But anyhow, my grandmother would be very happy with getting paid, but certainly not being trained. So good luck recruiting people. But nevertheless, so I will say that Jesse pointed out that I have a little bit of experience in government, and so I was there when in 2003, when Rendell became governor. From that year to 2010, $2.3 billion was added into the basis school funding. Now, I want to point out that $1 billion was cut in 2011, and we didn't make back up for school districts that money until about 2016 or 17. No, 2018, I'm sorry. Maybe later. So nevertheless, the point being, there was a period where a lot of money was put in, far beyond the rate of inflation, to see what the results would be. And in that period, Pennsylvania, in the period, I think it was between 2002 and 2008, in every subject tested, the performance increased. So English, math, 3rd, 8th, 11th, we still had an 11th grade PSSA at that point. Every subject, the performance increased. In fact, by 2010, we had the fewest number of kids at below basic than we'd ever had since they began taking the test in 2000, and lower than we have now in 2010. And at that point, between 2002 and 2010, we moved 300,000 kids to proficient across the state. In Philadelphia, the school district that we heard all these stories about, 35,000 kids were moved to proficient. So they had either been at below basic or basic, and now they were proficient. 35,000 kids made that the second largest school district in the state. It's as if you had an entire school district that didn't exist before and every kid was proficient, as Pittsburgh was smaller than Philly at that, smaller than 35,000. So that was on the PSSA, and I know the PSSA is just a point in time and there's lots of issues, but nevertheless, there was a direct correlation between putting in the resources and seeing the results. And beyond that, how did we compare with the rest of the country? So we also got, there was a big press conference, it may have been 2009 or 2010, when the National Center for Education and the Economy came to Pennsylvania because they wanted to shout out PA for, compared to other states, more rapidly getting in the top 3 or 4 for third grade reading, third grade math, third grade, eighth grade math. We moved, I think, by 2010 to the top of the country, or maybe second in the country in eighth grade math. So, and this happened in both, not just Philadelphia, but rural school districts too. You saw extraordinary results in rural school districts where the share of kids who were now performing at grade level or beyond was much higher than had been. And so does money produce those results, or was it just a blip in time and that was a good cohort of kids? I don't think it was a particularly different cohort of kids. There were resources. Now, those resources could only be used certain ways, right? You had to reduce class size. You had to use them to upgrade your curricula. You had to use them for upgrading your science and math materials. You had to use them for full-day kindergarten. You had to use them for training your teachers on new curricula. I mean, there were 9 prescribed uses on the new money beyond the rate of inflation. So school districts didn't have a lot of choice. They had to use the money. And they had to use it for things where research had proven there would, and there was a class size definition, and all this was defined in statute, bipartisan. And perhaps it was the combination of the money and the prescriptive use, but we saw results that were very dramatic. I'd be happy to send you a detailed memo on that. I can dig it out from those days, because we didn't know when we began this if it was going to happen. And we were, I think all legislators and the governors and the department were pleasantly surprised, and it reinforced our commitment that every kid can learn if they have the resources that they need in their school district to make that possible.
Thanks. If you can get that information
Sure.
to us, because I think that kind of information not only reinforces us redoing some of those types of things, but also allows us to then go into some of these other areas where we haven't invested before and say, there's an opportunity to do that same kind of thing and get the same kind of results in some of those things if we actually just invest in it. So, thank you. With that, I want to thank this panel. We're only an hour and 45 minutes behind today. With that, this hearing is now adjourned. Excuse me, recess to the call of the chair. I'm just reading what they tell me.